They are not a myth, they are a memory. For thousands of years, every culture on Earth told the same story, not of gods, but of something else. Towering, cold-blooded, scaled intelligences that descended, ruled, and shaped humanity from the shadows. And today, the story hasn't changed. Only the faces have. Abductees describe them in chilling detail. Conspiracy theorists point to the thrones they secretly occupy. Polls show millions believe we are not alone. We are not in control. This is the terrifying theory, that human history has never truly been ours, that from the pharaoh's crown to the presidential office, a hidden reptilian will has guided our path, patient, ancient, absolute. The serpent never left. It just learned to wear a suit. The shadow in our myths. They are described as towering, cold-blooded beings with slit pupil eyes that glow in the dark. Their skin is scaled, their presence commanding, their will absolute. For those who claim to have encountered them, the message is clear. Reptilians are not distant myths, but the hidden masters of our world. The idea is terrifying, that human history has never truly belonged to us. That behind thrones and parliaments, kings and presidents, there has always been another intelligence, reptilian in nature, shaping our path with patience and control. The serpent has always haunted our stories. In Genesis, it tempts humanity into exile. In China, dragons ruled as symbols of imperial power. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan brought knowledge and law. From the cobra goddess of Egypt to the Nagas of Hindu epics, the same motif repeats, serpentine beings guiding or dominating humanity. In modern times, the figure returned with alarming clarity. Abductees described them not as gods, but as humanoid reptiles, muscular, scaly, hypnotic-eyed beings who communicated telepathically and fed on fear. These accounts were detailed, consistent, and spread across continents. Belief in their presence is not confined to the fringes. Gallup polls show 1 in 3 Americans believes UFOs are alien craft. A 2021 Pew study found 65% believe intelligent life exists beyond Earth. Harvard psychiatrist John Mack's research suggested millions believe they have been abducted, and among them many describe reptilian captors. The serpent of myth has become the alien of testimony, and if these stories are true, then humanity has never been alone, never been free, and even now, in ways we cannot see, the reptilians may still be watching. Chapter 1. Reptilian Origins. Origins of the reptilian idea. The belief in reptilian intelligences did not emerge in modern times. Long before the age of UFO sightings and conspiracy theories, humanity filled its earliest myths with serpents, dragons, and snake-like gods. Across continents, cultures that never touched each other still carved and recorded stories of serpentine beings who lived beneath the earth, descended from the heavens, or ruled over humans with both wisdom and terror. When people today speak of reptilians as hidden masters, they are echoing a lineage of myth that stretches back to the very beginning of civilization. In ancient Mesopotamia, serpent figures appear again and again in carvings and texts. One of the most striking is Ningishzida, known as the Lord of the Good Tree, often depicted as a serpent with a human head or as a man with snakes rising from his shoulders. His symbol, 2 entwined snakes, survives today in the caduceus, the staff still used in medicine. To his people, Ningishzida represented life, death, and authority, but to modern interpreters, he hints at something stranger. Some scholars have connected him to the Anunnaki, the powerful sky gods described in Sumerian and Akkadian lore. These beings were said to descend from the heavens, guide humanity, and even shape its destiny. In the 20th century, writers such as Zecharia Sitchin argued controversially that the Anunnaki were not gods at all, but extraterrestrials who engineered humanity for service. For those who believe in reptilian bloodlines, these serpent-like deities are among the earliest signs of a hidden ruling race. Far to the east, India's vast mythological tradition adds another piece to the puzzle. In the Mahabharata and the Puranas, the Nagas are described as half-human, half-serpent beings. They are shapeshifters, able to take human form when they wish, but in their true nature, they are reptilian and powerful. They live in an underground realm called Patala, filled with treasures and secret knowledge. Sometimes they are benevolent, bringing fertility and rain. Other times they are vengeful, wielding poison and destruction. Even in myth, humans are warned not to cross them. The Nagas embody the duality that will later define the reptilian archetype, protectors or oppressors depending on their will. Their subterranean world resonates strongly with later conspiracy theories of reptilian beings hidden in underground bases. Across the ocean, Mesoamerican civilizations raised the serpent to the highest level of divinity. The Aztecs worshipped Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, as a god of creation, knowledge, and the winds. The Maya revered Kukulkan, whose Great Pyramid at Chichen Itza was designed so that on the equinox, a shadow in the shape of a serpent slithers down its steps. These were not demons, but civilizing forces credited with bringing law, astronomy, and agriculture to humanity. Yet the imagery is the same, a serpent figure ruling over mankind, tied to the cycles of the heavens. When Spanish conquistadors arrived, some chroniclers claimed that Hernán Cortés was mistaken for Quetzalcoatl, returning from the east. In modern imagination, these gods are sometimes reinterpreted as evidence of contact with non-human intelligences, serpent-like beings who ruled and taught humanity long before European conquest. Egypt and Greece, too, were filled with serpent symbols of authority and fear. In Egypt, the cobra goddess Wadjet reared above the crown of the pharaoh, her hood flared in eternal vigilance. Every ruler bore her image on their forehead, a reminder that kingship itself was guarded by the serpent. In Greece, Apollo slew the giant python at Delphi and claimed its sacred oracle. Medusa, with her living crown of snakes, petrified men with a glance. In each tradition, the serpent was never just an animal. It was a figure of power, transformation, and terror. Why do serpents appear with such force across cultures? Anthropologists suggest it is rooted in survival. Humans evolved with an instinctive fear of snakes, which carried deadly venom. That fear became a symbol repeated in myth as a reminder of danger and cunning. Psychologists such as Carl Jung went further, describing the serpent as an archetype in the collective unconscious, a primal image of hidden wisdom, renewal, and destruction. The serpent sheds its skin, symbolizing rebirth. It coils unseen, symbolizing secrecy. It strikes without warning, symbolizing death. Few creatures embody so much duality, and it is this duality that makes it the perfect vessel for the reptilian idea. Modern conspiracy culture seizes on these ancient echoes. The serpent in Eden is recast as the alien tempter. The feathered god of Mesoamerica becomes an ancient astronaut. The underground Naga becomes a subterranean reptilian. The cobra on the pharaoh's brow becomes the Illuminati bloodline. To believers, these are not coincidences. They are fragments of a suppressed truth. Humanity remembering in myth what it once encountered in reality, from clay tablets in Mesopotamia to pyramids in Mexico, from Hindu epics to Egyptian crowns, the serpent has never been far from human imagination. It is teacher and tyrant, guardian and deceiver, and in the modern reptilian narrative, all these stories are not separate threads, but parts of one tapestry, a long and hidden history of beings who once walked openly among us and who may still be here. If that interpretation is correct, then the reptilian idea is not new at all. It is as old as the first gods, as enduring as the dragon, and as universal as fear itself. And if those myths are more than metaphor, then what we call legend may be something far darker, the faint memory of a truth too ancient and too terrifying to forget. Chapter 2. The physical appearance of reptilians. Appearance and traits. When witnesses describe the reptilians, they do not speak in vague impressions or blurred shapes. The accounts are unnervingly detailed, as if the image of these beings is burned into memory. They are consistently described as tall, between 6 and 9 ft, humanoid in form, but far more imposing than a human frame. Their shoulders are broad, their limbs muscular, their movements powerful and deliberate. To those who claim to have stood before them, the reptilians radiate authority simply by their presence. Their skin is said to be scaly or leathery, textured like the hide of a crocodile or snake. The color varies in reports. Some describe green or brown hues, others gray or copper, occasionally black. In dim light, the surface is said to shimmer, reflecting back faint patterns like reptile scales under the sun. The head is often described as elongated with ridged brows and angular jaws. In some cases, witnesses claim to have seen horn-like protrusions or bony ridges along the crown of the skull. These are not soft human faces, but sharp chiseled visages that evoke both predator and monarch. It is the eyes, however, that dominate nearly every account. Vertical slit pupils, unblinking, glowing with an inner light, yellow, red, or green. Abductees insist that the gaze is hypnotic, paralyzing, as if the being could pierce through every thought and strip away free will. Some have compared the experience of meeting those eyes to being pinned by a predator, the ancient fear of prey frozen before the strike. Others describe a feeling of telepathic intrusion, as if thoughts not their own were being placed into their minds. The hands and feet also bear little resemblance to ours. Witnesses speak of long clawed digits, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, tipped with talon-like nails. The fingers are described as unnaturally long, the grip powerful, and the claws capable of tearing into flesh or metal alike. Their feet are often said to resemble those of reptiles, splayed and clawed, leaving impressions unlike any human footprint. One detail recurs in abductee testimony with disturbing frequency: the smell. People who claim to have encountered reptilians often speak of a sulfuric or acidic odor that fills the air, sometimes compared to ammonia or rotting eggs. The stench, they say, clings to the skin and clothes long after the experience. In folklore, foul odors were once associated with demons or malevolent spirits. In the modern era, it has become one of the sensory markers of the reptilian presence. Not all reptilians are said to look the same. In the literature of conspiracy and abduction, 3 broad categories appear. The Draconian or Draco are portrayed as rulers, taller, stronger, sometimes winged, and carrying themselves with the bearing of monarchs. They are said to be the leaders of their kind, the architects of control. Beneath them are the common reptoids, the soldiers and enforcers, humanoid but without wings, often reported in abduction encounters as guards or aggressors. And then there are the hybrids, beings that appear human at a glance, but whose reptilian features can surface under stress or scrutiny. These are said to be infiltrators, walking unnoticed among human society, holding positions of influence while hiding their true identity. Their behavior, as described in reports, is consistent with their appearance. They are not portrayed as curious explorers or distant observers, but as commanding presences. Witnesses describe them as telepathic, communicating without words, projecting dominance and control directly into the mind. Their voices, when spoken, are said to be guttural, hissing, or resonant, the sound of a predator rather than a human throat. Most disturbingly, abductees often insist that the reptilians feed on more than resources or genetics, that they feed on fear itself. The concept of loosh, popularized by out-of-body researcher Robert Monroe, describes an energy generated by human emotion, particularly terror. Many abductees have echoed this idea, saying that reptilians deliberately invoke fear in order to harvest it, drawing strength from the suffering of their captives. Scientists and psychologists have tried to make sense of why these features recur so consistently in testimony. Neuroscientist Paul MacLean in the 1960s coined the idea of the reptilian brain, the oldest part of the human brain governing survival instincts, aggression, and dominance. Some argue that when people describe reptilian beings, they are projecting the qualities of this primal brain outward, giving form to their subconscious fear of control and predation. Others point to evolutionary speculation. In the 1980s, paleontologist Dale Russell proposed a thought experiment. If the dinosaur Troodon had not gone extinct, it might have evolved into an intelligent, upright reptilian humanoid. His dinosauroid reconstruction bears an uncanny resemblance to the reptilian beings described in abduction lore. Whether coincidence or cultural archetype, the image of a reptilian intelligence seems to arise naturally from both science and myth. What makes the accounts most unsettling is their consistency. From America to Europe, from Africa to Asia, Abductees describe nearly identical features: tall, scaled beings with slit pupil eyes, telepathic communication, clawed hands, and a stench of sulfur. Researchers like Dr. Carla Turner, who documented multiple abduction testimonies, noted how the reptilian reports carried disturbing commonalities, especially when compared with the more clinical detached encounters with greys. MUFON case files and independent testimonies across decades all reinforce the same chilling picture, as if witnesses separated by culture and continent were all glimpsing the same presence. For skeptics, these similarities can be explained by psychology and media influence. For believers, they are evidence of a reality too widespread to dismiss. Whatever the explanation, the image of the reptilian is fixed, not vague, not fluid, but detailed, defined, and enduring. If these accounts are imagined, then humanity has conjured a predator that perfectly embodies its deepest fears: domination, coldness, the loss of free will. But if they are not imagined, then the picture is far worse. It would mean that such beings are real, and that the reptilian presence described in myth, feared in psychology, and whispered in abduction accounts is not symbolic at all. It would mean they are here. And if they are here, watching us with those unblinking eyes, then humanity's place as master of its own destiny is nothing more than an illusion. Chapter 3. Rise of the Conspiracy. Modern birth of the reptilian conspiracy. The modern idea of reptilians, not as gods of myth, but as literal hidden rulers, did not emerge from nowhere. It developed gradually in the late 19th and 20th centuries, taking fragments of occult philosophy, early science fiction, and UFO contact narratives and weaving them into a conspiracy framework that endures today. By the time David Icke popularized the idea in the 1990s, the groundwork had already been laid for decades. In the late 1800s, esoteric thinkers within the Theosophical movement were already speaking of ancient races with serpent qualities. Helena Blavatsky, in her massive work, The Secret Doctrine, 1888, described a cosmology in which humanity was shaped by successive root races. Among them were serpent-like beings associated with wisdom, cunning, and hidden knowledge. Blavatsky's writings, hugely influential on occult and mystical groups, helped plant the seed that reptilian intelligences were part of humanity's forgotten past. Although she framed them as spiritual archetypes rather than physical aliens, later writers would reinterpret her serpents as literal, non-human entities still present in the world. As pulp magazines flourished in the early 20th century, the serpent being stepped out of esoteric texts and into the pages of popular fiction. In 1929, the writer Robert E. Howard published The Shadow Kingdom in Weird Tales, introducing readers to serpent men who could disguise themselves as humans and infiltrate kingdoms from within. Howard, best known for creating Conan the Barbarian, was drawing from earlier occult traditions, but his image of shape-shifting serpent rulers would resonate far beyond fantasy. These stories laid down one of the core tropes of modern reptilian conspiracy: the idea that non-human infiltrators walk among us unseen, but pulling the strings of power. Other pulp writers, including H.P. Lovecraft, also introduced reptilian races in their mythos. Lovecraft's influence was less direct, but equally enduring. His tales of subterranean and ancient non-human intelligences, some reptilian, some amorphous, blurred the lines between fiction and forbidden history. Readers and later conspiracy theorists often treated pulp's reptilian imagery as though it were encoded truth disguised as entertainment. By the middle of the 20th century, UFO culture began to absorb these reptilian motifs. The contactee era of the 1950s and 1960s was dominated by tales of benevolent space brothers, usually human-like beings warning of nuclear war. But scattered among them were darker reports, lizard-like entities described in abduction accounts. George Adamski, one of the most famous contactees, did not speak of reptilians directly, but later contactees, such as Barbara Marciniak, who claimed to channel extraterrestrials, spoke of an ancient battle between light-based beings and reptilian oppressors. Marciniak's books, particularly Bringers of the Dawn, 1992, would influence New Age circles and overlap with emerging conspiracy theories about alien control. During the 1960s through the 1980s, as the abduction phenomenon grew, reptilian descriptions became more common. Reports cataloged by researchers such as John Keel, author of The Mothman Prophecies, and Jacques Vallée, who saw UFOs as part of a larger control system, began to include beings that did not fit the mold of small grays or tall Nordics. Some abductees insisted their captors were reptilian, muscular, scaled, and cruel. These accounts rarely reached the mainstream press, but circulated in UFO journals, forming an underground body of testimony that reinforced the ancient archetype. The Cold War climate gave these ideas fertile ground. In an age of secrecy, nuclear fear, and distrust of government, the notion that hidden cold-blooded masters were pulling the strings resonated strongly. The Illuminati conspiracy that elite bloodlines secretly controlled world events began to merge with reptilian imagery. The serpent bloodline, a motif already embedded in myth and scripture, was now mapped onto European aristocracy and American political dynasties. Writers such as William Cooper, whose 1991 book, Behold a Pale Horse, became a cornerstone of conspiracy literature, hinted at alien collaboration with hidden elites. And although Cooper focused on grays, later interpreters folded reptilians into the same narrative. The reptilian conspiracy did not yet dominate UFO culture, but the pieces were aligning: ancient serpent myths, theosophical writings, pulp fiction about serpent men, scattered abduction accounts, Cold War paranoia, and the Illuminati framework were converging. By the late 1980s, underground publications and early bulletin board systems on the internet were already discussing reptilian infiltrators. In these circles, the reptilian was not just a monster from myth. It was a symbol of hidden control, one that mapped neatly onto fears of globalization, government secrecy, and shadowy elites. By the time David Icke stepped onto the stage in the 1990s, the reptilian conspiracy was ready for a spokesman. He did not invent the idea, but he gave it global visibility. The serpent archetype, whispered in ancient temples and pulp magazines, had migrated into the bloodstream of conspiracy culture. What had once been myth had become for many a terrifying possibility that the rulers of our world were not human at all. The modern birth of the reptilian conspiracy is not the creation of a single writer or witness. It is the fusion of centuries of symbolism and decades of paranoia, crystallizing into a narrative too potent to fade. If myths are echoes of memory, then the serpent has never left us. It only changed its skin, reappearing in new guises as humanity struggled to understand its own masters. And if the stories are true, then the transition from serpent god to reptilian overlord was not just metaphor, but revelation. The same intelligence appearing across ages, adapting, infiltrating, and waiting for its control to be recognized. Chapter 4. David Icke and the Global Spotlight. David Icke Spotlight. If the reptilian idea had remained confined to occult texts, pulp fiction, and scattered abduction reports, it might have stayed on the margins of conspiracy culture. But in the 1990s, one man gave it a global stage. David Icke, a former BBC sports broadcaster turned alternative lecturer, transformed the reptilian narrative from an underground theory into a worldwide phenomenon. His story is as unlikely as it is controversial, and without him, it is doubtful that reptilians would have become the dominant archetype of alien control in popular culture. Icke began his public life not in conspiracy, but in mainstream sports journalism. A promising goalkeeper in his youth, his football career ended abruptly due to arthritis. He reinvented himself as a television presenter, becoming a familiar face to British audiences during the 1970s and 1980s. By the late 1980s, however, Icke's life took a dramatic turn. He claimed to have experienced a series of spiritual awakenings, visions, and synchronicities that convinced him he was chosen to reveal hidden truths about the world. In 1991, during a now infamous interview on The Terry Wogan Show, Icke announced that he was the son of the Godhead and predicted global catastrophes. The British press mocked him mercilessly, portraying him as a deluded eccentric. For most public figures, such ridicule would have ended a career, but for Icke, it became the catalyst for a reinvention. Stripped of his mainstream credibility, he doubled down on his mission, diving deeper into alternative research, ancient history, and conspiracy literature. By the mid-1990s, Ickey's theories had crystallized around a central claim. Humanity is secretly controlled by a race of shape-shifting reptilian beings from the Draco star system. In his 1999 book, The Biggest Secret, he outlined a sweeping narrative. The world's political leaders, aristocratic families, and financial elites were not fully human. They were hybrids, part human and part reptilian, created through ancient interbreeding programs to serve as the visible rulers of humanity while their reptilian masters remained in the shadows. One of Ickey's most explosive claims was that bloodlines told the story. He argued that so-called blue blood aristocracies and dynasties were not merely privileged by history, but genetically distinct, carrying reptilian DNA. Royal families, banking dynasties such as the Rothschilds, and political leaders from George H.W. Bush to Bill Clinton were accused of being either full-blood reptilians or hybrids. According to Ickey, these figures used shape-shifting abilities and holographic technology to maintain their human guise, while behind closed doors, they revealed their true reptilian forms. These claims were met with ridicule by mainstream commentators, but they also electrified alternative communities. The idea tied together many strands of existing conspiracy: the Illuminati, secret societies, bloodline dynasties, and UFO abduction reports. Where earlier theories had hinted at hidden control, Ickey offered a vivid image: world leaders literally pulling off their masks to reveal reptilian eyes and scales. The reaction was intense. Critics accused Ickey of rebranding old anti-Semitic tropes, pointing out that his rhetoric about secret bloodlines controlling the world echoed centuries of anti-Jewish conspiracy. Ickey denied the charge, insisting he meant it literally, not Jews, but reptilians. His insistence on a non-human enemy did not silence the criticism, but it drew a clear line between his theory and purely human conspiracies. Despite controversy, or perhaps because of it, Ickey's lectures drew large audiences. His books sold internationally, translated into multiple languages. The internet amplified his reach in forums, chat rooms, and early websites. The idea of reptilian infiltrators spread quickly, aided by viral claims and shaky videos said to show politicians' eyes momentarily flashing with reptilian pupils. Clips of Queen Elizabeth or American presidents supposedly glitching into reptilian form were shared widely, reinforcing the sense that Ickey's theories were not just fantasy, but a hidden reality slipping into view. The late 1990s and early 2000s were a fertile time for conspiracy culture. The rise of globalization, the internet boom, and political scandals all fueled distrust of authority. Against this backdrop, Ickey's reptilian thesis found eager audiences. His lectures often lasted up to 10 hours, weaving together ancient myths, modern abductions, financial corruption, and secret societies into a single story of reptilian domination. To his followers, it was a grand unifying theory of hidden control. The impact on popular culture was unmistakable. By the early 2000s, the phrase shape-shifting reptilian had become a meme. Comedians, musicians, and filmmakers referenced Ickey's ideas, often mockingly, but always spreading them further. Shows like The X-Files and V had already used reptilian themes, but after Ickey, audiences began to see them as more than fiction. They became coded references to what many believed was a suppressed truth. While skeptics dismissed Ickey as a charlatan or fantasist, even critics admitted his reach was remarkable. A 2013 poll by Public Policy Polling revealed that 4% of Americans, millions of people, said they believed shape-shifting reptilian people control our world by taking on human form. That percentage may seem small, but it is larger than the number of Americans who admit to believing in some established religious sects. Ickey had successfully planted the reptilian conspiracy into the cultural bloodstream. The endurance of his ideas cannot be explained solely by spectacle. They resonated because they tapped into something older and deeper. The serpent had haunted humanity's myths for millennia. Ickey repackaged that archetype in modern form, tying it to globalization, media manipulation, and distrust of elites. His reptilians were both ancient gods and modern politicians, both cosmic predators and familiar faces on television. For those who followed him, Icky offered not just entertainment, but a terrifying explanation for the chaos of the modern world. Wars, financial collapses, political corruption, media bias, all could be traced to reptilian manipulation. The theory offered clarity, however dark, in a confusing age. And for skeptics, the disturbing truth was that even as they laughed, the meme of reptilian overlords continued to spread, impossible to fully erase. By the end of the 20th century, the reptilian idea was no longer an underground whisper. It was a global narrative accessible in bookstores, online, and in lecture halls filled with believers. David Icke had taken the serpent of ancient myth, the monster of pulp fiction, the nightmare of abductees, and turned it into a conspiracy with a human face, or rather a face that might not be human at all. The spotlight he created burned brightly, casting the reptilians not as obscure myth, but as cultural icons. They had become part of our imagination, part of our politics, part of our unease. Whether literal beings from Draco or symbolic projections of our deepest fears, they were now in the open. And if Icky was right, then the laughter, the mockery, the denial, all of it only served the masters of control, who could shapeshift back into power as soon as the stage lights dimmed. Chapter 5. Abductions and Accounts. Eyewitness accounts and abductions. If ancient myths provide the foundation, and David Icke gave the reptilian idea its global stage, then eyewitness testimonies and abduction accounts form the dark heart of the narrative. Unlike myths or theories, these are personal stories told by individuals who claim to have seen, touched, or been taken by beings that fit the reptilian image. For believers, they are the most disturbing evidence, detailed, emotional, and consistent across time and culture. For skeptics, they are the hardest to explain away without venturing into psychology, trauma, or cultural contamination. Either way, they are central to the story of the reptilians. Many abductees describe their captors as small gray-skinned humanoids, the so-called Greys. These figures are by far the most common in UFO lore, coldly clinical, described as technicians or scientists performing experiments. But woven through the body of abduction literature is another far more menacing presence, the reptilian. Where the Greys are detached, the reptilians are dominating. Where the Greys appear to act as functionaries, the reptilians are described as commanders, orchestrating and controlling the entire ordeal. One of the earliest public cases linking reptilian figures to abduction narratives comes from the 1980s and 1990s, documented by researchers such as Dr. Carla Turner, a professor turned abduction investigator. In her books, Taken and Masquerade of Angels, Turner collected testimonies from women who claimed repeated abductions by non-human beings. While Greys appeared often in their stories, several described tall, scaled figures who radiated intimidation and, in some cases, sexual aggression. Witnesses insisted these beings were not illusions or projections, but physical presences that left emotional scars and sometimes physical marks. Turner herself concluded that reptilian encounters were among the most traumatic described, contrasting them with the more detached experiences with Greys. Abductees often describe the reptilians as tormentors. Accounts include episodes of invasive physical procedures, experiments that felt designed not for research, but for domination. Some claim the beings sought genetic material, forcing hybridization programs intended to create reptilian human offspring. Others describe sexual assaults, deeply disturbing accounts in which reptilians violated boundaries, not only physically but psychically, instilling overwhelming fear and then feeding on it. These stories echo the louche concept articulated by Robert Monroe, the idea that non-human entities harvest human emotional energy. In many testimonies, abductees emerge convinced that the reptilians thrive on terror itself, using fear as both weapon and sustenance. The consistency of sensory details makes the testimonies even harder to dismiss. Many report the same sulfuric or ammonia-like odor when reptilians are present. Some describe claw marks or scratches left on their skin. Others recall telepathic communication so overpowering that it felt as if their own thoughts had been replaced. The repetition of these motifs, claws, eyes, odor, control, across different witnesses and decades, suggests either a powerful shared archetype or a real presence encountered by many. Among the more infamous testimonies tied to the reptilian narrative are the claims surrounding the Dulce Base legend in New Mexico. This underground facility, according to whistleblowers like Phil Schneider, was not only a military installation, but a joint human-alien complex where reptilians oversaw genetic experiments. Schneider, a geological engineer who gave public lectures in the 1990s, claimed he witnessed a firefight between U.S. soldiers and reptilian beings deep underground in 1979. Though his story has been fiercely debated, and his death in 1996 ruled a suicide, his claims became a cornerstone of reptilian lore, linking the beings not only to abductions, but to military secrecy. Other abductees describe encounters in remote deserts or rural areas. Kathy O'Brien, in her controversial book, Transformation of America, alleged that mind control programs run by U.S. intelligence were connected to reptilian overseers, blending MK-Ultra-like operations with alien control. While many critics view her account as unreliable, within conspiracy circles, it reinforced the belief that reptilians were directly involved in manipulating human institutions and individuals. The Montauk narratives tied to supposed secret experiments in New York during the Cold War also included references to reptilian beings as both collaborators and rulers. These stories, though lacking concrete evidence, became part of a growing underground mythology in which reptilians appeared not only in isolated abductions, but at the very centers of hidden projects and human experimentation. MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, has collected thousands of abduction cases over the years, and while the majority focus on grays, a consistent minority describe reptilian beings. Researchers who catalog these reports often note how emotionally intense they are compared to other encounters. Witnesses speak of overwhelming dread, the sense of being in the presence of something predatory. Some describe being forced to stand or kneel while the beings examine them. Others insist they saw humans working alongside reptilians, further fueling suspicions of collusion between hidden elites and non-human masters. Skeptics argue that these accounts can be explained by sleep paralysis, false memory implantation under hypnosis, or cultural cross-pollination from science fiction, but abductees often push back, pointing out that their experiences were not dreamlike, but physical, leaving scars, missing time, and trauma that lingered long after. The debate remains unresolved, but the persistence of reptilian testimonies ensures they cannot be ignored. Dr. Carla Turner, before her untimely death in 1996, warned that abductions involving reptilians were not simply misunderstood spiritual experiences, but direct evidence of manipulation and control. She argued that the beings used deception, creating illusions to mask their true appearance or intentions, but that the underlying reality was consistent: domination, intimidation, and exploitation. Her warnings remain among the most cited in abduction research, lending gravity to the claims. The weight of these testimonies has shaped the modern image of reptilians as much as Icky's lectures or ancient myths. They are not abstract archetypes here, but visceral presences described by ordinary people who believe they were taken against their will. The eyes, the claws, the odor, the psychic dominance. These details appear again and again across cultures and decades, forming a mosaic of fear. If these accounts are psychological projections, then humanity has conjured a remarkably consistent predator, one that embodies our deepest fears of violation and control. But if they are not projections, then the implications are darker still. It would mean that reptilians are not symbols, but active participants in our lives, abducting, experimenting, and manipulating under cover of night. For those who believe, the testimonies speak for themselves. They insist that the reptilians are not myths, but tormentors, not archetypes, but predators. And if that is true, then the question is no longer whether they exist, but how much of our world they already control. Chapter 6. Underground Empires, Underground Bases, and Hidden Empires. If reptilians exist, then where do they live? This question has haunted researchers since the first reports of their presence. The consistent answer given again and again in abduction accounts, whistleblower testimonies, and conspiracy literature is that their strongholds lie not in the open skies, but beneath the earth itself. Subterranean realms, vast networks of tunnels, hidden bases, and cavernous cities are said to house the reptilian presence. For believers, these underground empires represent the hidden geography of control, the literal depths where human and non-human agendas collide. Among the most infamous of these alleged sites is the Dulce Base in New Mexico. Located near the small town of Dulce on the Jicarilla Apache Reservation, the base has been described in countless conspiracy accounts as a massive underground facility where humans and aliens, including reptilians, collaborate on genetic and technological experiments. The legend first gained traction in the late 1970s and 1980s, with claims that abductions in the region were linked to activity beneath the Archuleta Mesa. In the 1990s, the story gained international notoriety thanks to whistleblowers like Phil Schneider, a geological engineer who publicly declared that he had participated in construction projects at deep-level military bases. Schneider claimed that in 1979, while working at Dulce, he encountered reptilian beings during a routine drilling operation. According to his testimony, a firefight erupted between U.S. military personnel and the reptilians, resulting in dozens of deaths and leaving Schneider injured. He described the beings as tall, scaled, and aggressive, living deep within the earth and defending their territory. His lectures in the mid-1990s, often delivered with visible emotion, and the scars he attributed to the incident captivated audiences. When he was later found dead in 1996, ruled a suicide but under suspicious circumstances, his testimony gained even more traction. Within conspiracy culture, his death was seen not as self-inflicted, but as silencing by forces that did not want his story told. The Dulce narrative became a cornerstone of reptilian lore, blending seamlessly with abduction testimonies that described underground laboratories where humans were experimented on, hybrid embryos were gestated, and reptilians directed operations with chilling authority. Some accounts even described vats filled with biological matter, cages of captive humans, and genetic experiments merging reptilian and human DNA. These details, however fantastic, reinforced the idea that the reptilians were not distant visitors, but embedded in hidden facilities beneath American soil. Dulce is not alone in the lore of subterranean reptilian presence. Richard Shaver, a writer in the 1940s, published bizarre but influential accounts in Amazing Stories magazine describing encounters with Darrow, degenerate underground beings who manipulated humanity from beneath the earth. While Shaver's writings were framed as a mix of science fiction and alleged truth, many readers treated them as revelations. His descriptions of cruel non-human entities in underground cities became an early template for later reptilian conspiracies. Mountains and sacred sites across the world are also tied to reptilian myths. In California, Mount Shasta has long been associated with hidden civilizations. Native American traditions speak of spirits and beings dwelling within the mountain. Later esoteric traditions, including those of Theosophy, described it as a gateway to Lemuria, a lost continent whose survivors retreated underground. Modern conspiracy theorists have folded reptilians into this narrative, claiming that bases beneath Mount Shasta house non-human rulers working alongside secret military programs. In Tibet, legends of Shambhala and Agartha describe subterranean kingdoms ruled by advanced beings hidden from the surface but occasionally interacting with humanity. Western explorers in the 19th and 20th centuries brought these tales back to Europe, fueling speculation about underground masters guiding human affairs. In South America, vast cave systems in Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil have inspired similar legends. The Tayos caves in Ecuador, explored by figures such as Erich von Daniken in the 1970s, were rumored to contain metallic libraries left by ancient civilizations guarded by non-human beings. Within reptilian lore, these sites are often cited as global outposts of the same hidden empire. There is a strange consistency to these stories. Whether in New Mexico, California, Tibet, or South America, the narrative is the same. Beneath sacred or remote places lies a world unseen, one that is older than human history and inhabited by non-human intelligences. For some, these are merely myths of hidden wisdom. For others, they are evidence of a literal reptilian network beneath our feet. Even declassified military projects fuel suspicion. During the Cold War, governments around the world invested heavily in underground infrastructure. The Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado, built deep into solid granite, became the headquarters for NORAD, capable of surviving nuclear war. The United States constructed hundreds of underground bunkers and facilities, many still classified. The Soviet Union built vast subterranean complexes beneath Moscow, including rumored Metro 2 tunnels for government evacuation. To conspiracy theorists, these secretive projects are not simply about national security. They are evidence of deeper collaborations, hiding something more than military command centers. In this context, the reptilian underground empire becomes not only possible but inevitable. If governments have dug into the earth for survival, why not imagine that another intelligence has already claimed the depths for its own? The parallels between ancient myths of subterranean serpent beings and modern accounts of underground bases are too close, believers argue, to be coincidence. For skeptics, these stories reflect psychological archetypes: the underworld as a symbol of hidden fear, the serpent as the eternal predator. For believers, they are blueprints of reality, half-revealed fragments pointing to an empire that has always existed beneath us. The most disturbing aspect of the underground base narrative is not simply that reptilians may live there, but that humans may be working with them. Testimonies like Schneider's and countless abduction accounts suggest collusion, secret deals in which governments traded technology for control, or worse, for access to human subjects. If true, this would mean that not only are reptilians real, but that human leaders have known all along, quietly submitting to their authority in exchange for power. If the stories of Dulce, Mount Shasta, Shambhala, and Cheyenne Mountain are nothing more than myth, then they speak to our enduring fear of hidden masters. But if even a fraction of them are true, then it would mean humanity does not rule the earth alone. It would mean that beneath our cities and landscapes, beneath our sacred mountains and deserts, another empire thrives, cold-blooded, secretive, and patient. And if that empire is real, then every step we take on the surface is just a thin crust above a kingdom we were never meant to see. Chapter 7. Psychology and Society. Psychological and Sociological Interpretations. If the reptilians are real, then they represent one of the greatest threats to humanity in our history. But if they are not, then why does the idea of reptilian overlords hold such power over our imagination? Psychologists, sociologists, and cultural theorists have long noted that the reptilian archetype speaks to something deep within the human psyche, something that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. Whether the accounts are literal encounters or symbolic projections, the grip of the reptilian image is undeniable. In the 1960s, neuroscientist Paul MacLean introduced the triune brain theory, dividing human neurology into three evolutionary layers: the reptilian brain, the limbic system, and the neocortex. According to MacLean, the reptilian brain is the most ancient structure responsible for survival instincts, territorial behavior, aggression, and dominance. Though modern neuroscience has moved beyond some aspects of this model, the metaphor remains powerful. The idea that beneath our rationality lies something cold-blooded, primal, and reptilian helps explain why the archetype resonates so strongly. When abductees describe reptilian beings radiating control, domination, and fear, they may be externalizing the oldest part of their own biology, the predator within, given a face and form. Psychology also points to Carl Jung's theory of archetypes within the collective unconscious. The serpent, Jung argued, is a universal symbol, a creature that embodies both creation and destruction, wisdom and deception. In dreams, myths, and visions, serpents appear as guardians of hidden knowledge, but also as threats to the dreamer's survival. Jung believed that archetypes emerge spontaneously across cultures because they reflect shared human experience. The serpent slithering unseen, the predator striking without warning. These images are hardwired into us. The modern reptilian may be nothing more than this ancient archetype resurfacing in a new context, fueled by cultural anxieties about control and power. Sociologists approach the phenomenon from another angle. They see the reptilian not as a psychological projection, but as a metaphor for oppressive systems. Cold-blooded, calculating, ruthless, the reptilian is the perfect symbol for corrupt elites and faceless institutions. In times of political turmoil, financial collapse, or technological upheaval, people search for explanations that make sense of chaos. A hidden cabal of reptilian rulers offers not only an answer, but a vivid image of inhumanity at the heart of human power. Michael Barkin, in his influential book, A Culture of Conspiracy, argued that conspiracy theories thrive because they simplify a complex world, offering a clear villain where reality is tangled and uncertain. The reptilian is the ultimate villain, intelligent, ancient, merciless, and above all, hidden. Cultural cross-pollination plays its part. Movies, television, and books have long depicted reptilian or lizard-like antagonists, from the Gorn of Star Trek in 1967 to the alien lizard overlords of the 1980s miniseries V. Each time the imagery appears in popular culture, it feeds back into the collective imagination, shaping abduction narratives and conspiracy claims. But while cultural influence can explain some details, it cannot fully account for the consistency of testimonies across decades and continents. The sulfuric smell, the slit eyes, the towering presence. These are details that appear even in cases far removed from Western media. For believers, that consistency is evidence of reality. For skeptics, it is evidence of a deeply ingrained archetype that surfaces regardless of culture or geography. There is also a sociological dimension to fear of infiltration. Humans have always harbored anxieties about outsiders, enemies disguised as friends, and hidden rulers pulling strings behind the scenes. From medieval fears of witches to Cold War paranoia about communist spies, societies often externalize their fears in stories of hidden enemies. The reptilian conspiracy may be a modern version of this dynamic, the fear that those who lead us are not only untrustworthy, but not even human. In an age of globalization and digital surveillance, the idea that our leaders are cold-blooded infiltrators resonates strongly with audiences who already feel powerless. Even within UFO studies, some researchers frame reptilians as projections of human psychology. David Jacobs, a historian and abduction researcher, suggested that the abduction phenomenon often reflects cultural fears and subconscious archetypes, though he also took many accounts seriously as literal experiences. For Jacobs and others, the darker encounters with reptilian beings may be symbolic expressions of trauma, dominance, and the human fear of being prey. Yet these interpretations, while compelling, cannot fully erase the impact of the testimonies. Abductees often resist psychological explanations, insisting that what they experienced was not a dream, hallucination, or metaphor. For them, the smell was real, the eyes were real, the touch was real. To suggest otherwise feels dismissive, an attempt to rationalize away an encounter that shattered their sense of reality. What remains then is ambiguity, a shadow that stretches between psychology and reality, archetype and flesh. Whether reptilians are literal beings or projections of our deepest fears, the image itself has power. It shapes culture, influences belief, and spreads across the world as a living narrative. And if the reptilians are only in our minds, then we must reckon with what that says about us, that buried within every human is the image of a predator, cold-blooded and watchful, waiting to rise. But if they are not just in our minds, if they are more than metaphor, then the predator is not within us at all. It is outside watching, hidden in plain sight, and it may already hold the reins of our civilization. Chapter 8. Hybrid theories. Genetic and hybridization theories. If reptilians exist, then one of the most disturbing claims about them is not simply that they control humanity from afar, but that they have mingled their genetics with ours. Across abduction accounts, conspiracy theories, and even ancient myths, the idea of reptilian-human hybrids appears again and again. For some, it is the ultimate proof of infiltration, a ruling class that looks human but is not. For others, it is a metaphor for dynasties that seem cold, detached, and alien to the people they govern. But whether taken literally or symbolically, the theme of hybridization lies at the center of reptilian lore. One of the most persistent modern claims is the connection between reptilians and the Rh-negative blood type. Around 15% of the global population carries this trait, which lacks a certain protein on the surface of red blood cells. Conspiracy theorists argue that Rh-negative blood is not of purely human origin, but evidence of an ancient genetic intervention. They point to the concentration of Rh-negative blood in certain populations, particularly among the Basques of Spain and France, and link it to the so-called blue blood aristocracy. The claim is that these lineages carry reptilian genetics that allow them to rise to power, blending in with humanity while retaining ties to their non-human ancestors. Abduction researchers such as Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs documented countless testimonies in which abductees described genetic procedures. Often witnesses reported that eggs or sperm were taken, embryos shown in tanks, or hybrid children briefly presented before being taken away. In most of these cases, the beings involved were greys, but reptilian figures sometimes appeared as overseers. In several accounts, abductees described reptilians supervising the genetic work, suggesting they were the true architects of the program while the greys acted as technicians. David Jacobs, in his book The Threat, 1998, argued that the abduction phenomenon represented a systematic program of hybridization designed to produce beings who could live seamlessly among humans. While Jacobs focused largely on gray activity, others in the field noted reptilian presences that appeared to dominate the process. For these researchers, the implication was that reptilian-human hybrids already walk among us, indistinguishable except perhaps for subtle traits. Unusual eyes, cold demeanor, or an air of authority that seems unnatural. Ancient myths echo the same possibility. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki are described as beings who came from the heavens and created humanity through genetic manipulation. Some interpretations, particularly those popularized by writers like Zecharia Sitchin, suggest that these gods interbred with humans, producing rulers of divine blood. In the Hebrew Bible, the Nephilim are described as offspring of the sons of God and human women, giants who ruled the earth in ancient times. Conspiracy theorists often conflate these traditions with reptilian narratives, suggesting that the ancient serpent gods were in fact reptilian entities who seeded hybrid bloodlines. Egyptian pharaohs also claimed divine lineage, often represented by serpent iconography. The uraeus, the cobra crown worn by pharaohs, symbolized their connection to serpent deities and their right to rule. In Mesoamerican cultures, rulers often associated themselves with Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. In each of these cases, power was legitimized through serpent symbolism and bloodline claims. When mapped onto modern reptilian theories, these traditions are interpreted as historical evidence that reptilian-human hybrids have always ruled from the top. Modern conspiracy literature extends the theme further. David Icke insists that many royal and aristocratic families are not merely symbolic descendants of serpent gods, but literal hybrids carrying reptilian DNA. He claims this explains the obsession with bloodlines among ruling elites from European monarchies to American political dynasties. Intermarriage among the powerful is framed not simply as the preservation of wealth, but as the preservation of reptilian heritage. Even outside conspiracy circles, scientists have occasionally speculated on the plausibility of hybridization with non-human species. In evolutionary biology, hybridization is common across related species. If reptilian humanoids evolved elsewhere, it is not impossible, at least in theory, that advanced genetic manipulation could allow for interbreeding. Though mainstream science rejects the idea, the concept feeds into a narrative where the reptilian-human hybrid is not fantasy, but the result of advanced bioengineering. The darker side of the hybrid theory is found in abductee testimonies of sexual assault and forced breeding. Witnesses like those documented by Carla Turner reported encounters where reptilian beings violated them in ways both physical and psychological, leaving them with memories of being used for reproduction. These stories are some of the most disturbing in UFO literature, but their persistence across decades lends them weight within the community that studies such claims. For those who tell them, the hybrids are not theoretical. They are children they briefly held, touched, or saw before being taken away forever. If these testimonies are true, then the idea of hybrid infiltration is not metaphorical, but a lived reality. It would mean that some portion of our population is not entirely human, and that the corridors of power may be filled with individuals whose loyalty lies not with humanity, but with their reptilian lineage. For skeptics, the hybrid theory reflects a mix of symbolic fears and pseudoscience. The obsession with bloodlines echoes historical anxieties about purity and power. The focus on Rh-negative blood is explained as a quirk of human genetics, not alien intervention, and the abduction testimonies are seen as products of trauma, sleep paralysis, or cultural influence. But even skeptics admit the sheer persistence of the theme is striking. Across cultures, across centuries, the same motif reappears, the serpent mixing its blood with ours, leaving behind a lineage that rules. And so the question remains unresolved. Are hybridization stories the echoes of ancient myths replayed in modern minds? Or are they warnings, testimonies of a reality in which the serpent never left but wove itself into us, hiding in our blood, waiting to reclaim what it seeded? If even part of these accounts are true, then humanity's rulers may not be strangers from the stars at all. They may be our own kin, reptilian blood wearing human skin. Chapter 9. Control methods, control mechanisms, how they influence humanity. If the reptilians are real, their greatest weapon may not be physical strength or advanced technology, but control. Again and again, abductees, contactees, and conspiracy theorists describe a terrifying pattern. The reptilians do not simply watch humanity, they manipulate it. Their methods range from psychic domination of individuals to systemic influence over governments, religions, and global events. It is this theme of control, silent, insidious, and total that has made the reptilian archetype one of the most powerful in conspiracy lore. On the personal level, testimonies describe overwhelming psychic or telepathic influence. Abductees often report being paralyzed without physical restraint, as though their minds had been switched off. Some describe hearing thoughts that were not their own, messages projected directly into consciousness. Others say they were forced to obey commands that bypassed their will entirely. Researchers like Dr. Carla Turner documented cases in which abductees insisted they were made to feel emotions that were not theirs. Fear, arousal, despair, all imposed by an external intelligence. This form of psychic dominance is consistent across accounts, reinforcing the idea that reptilians possess a capacity to invade and override human consciousness. The theme of feeding on fear runs parallel. The concept of loosh, articulated by out-of-body explorer Robert Monroe in the 1970s, describes an energy produced by intense human emotion, particularly fear and suffering. Many abductees believe the reptilians deliberately cultivate this energy, creating terror in order to harvest it. Witnesses speak of being placed in terrifying scenarios, sometimes shown visions of cataclysms or the suffering of loved ones, only to feel a draining sensation as the beings seem to absorb their fear. If true, then human emotion itself may be a form of resource, our deepest vulnerabilities transformed into sustenance for hidden masters. Beyond individual encounters, reptilian lore describes a larger mechanism of influence: infiltration. David Icke popularized the claim that reptilians use shape-shifting abilities or advanced holographic technology to disguise themselves as human. According to this view, politicians, monarchs, and corporate leaders may in fact be reptilian hybrids hiding in plain sight. Videos purporting to show eyes flashing into vertical pupils or faces briefly distorting have circulated online for decades, feeding the suspicion. While skeptics dismiss these as video glitches or illusions, the viral spread of such clips demonstrates the power of the belief. Shape-shifting itself is not unique to modern conspiracy. Many ancient myths describe serpent beings who could transform into human form. Hindu Nagas, for example, were said to appear as humans when they wished, while retaining their serpent nature. In European folklore, dragons and serpents often assumed human guises. The modern reptilian conspiracy echoes these traditions, suggesting that the myths were not allegory, but memory, distorted accounts of non-human infiltrators that survived through legend. The alleged infiltration extends far beyond politics. Conspiracy literature claims reptilian influence in banking systems, secret societies, media conglomerates, and religious institutions. The idea is not merely that individuals are controlled, but that entire systems are designed to channel humanity's energy toward domination. Wars, according to this framework, are not accidental, but engineered to generate loosh. Religious dogmas are not divine truth, but tools of obedience. Media spectacles are distractions to keep populations docile. Whether or not these claims are literal, they mirror widespread anxieties about globalization, authoritarianism, and surveillance. The Cold War era intensified these fears. Documents like the CIA's MKUltra program, which experimented with mind control techniques, are often cited as evidence that governments themselves are learning from or collaborating with reptilian methods. Abductees who describe reptilian beings alongside human military personnel add weight to this suspicion, reinforcing the belief that control is not just external, but internal, a partnership between non-human overlords and human collaborators willing to trade freedom for power. The spiritual dimension of control cannot be ignored. Contactees like Barbara Marciniak, who claimed to channel extraterrestrial voices, spoke of a cosmic struggle between beings of light and reptilian oppressors. Her books described the reptilians as archonic entities, a term borrowed from Gnosticism, where archons were parasitic rulers of the material world. In this sense, the reptilian is not just a physical predator, but a metaphysical one, enslaving not only our bodies, but our very spirits. This interpretation dovetails with abduction accounts that describe psychic domination as total, leaving the victim feeling hollow, drained, or spiritually violated. Control also manifests in subtler ways: manipulation of perception. Some abductees claim that reptilians can project illusions, making themselves appear as benevolent beings or even as familiar humans. Only later do the victims recall flashes of scales, claws, or slit eyes. If accurate, this ability would make them nearly undetectable, capable of walking among us unnoticed. The chilling implication is that encounters with seemingly ordinary people might in fact be interactions with predators in disguise. Scientific speculation occasionally brushes against these ideas. Research into hypnosis, suggestion, and psychological priming shows how malleable human perception can be. Experiments on false memories demonstrate that entire experiences can be implanted in the mind. To conspiracy theorists, this is confirmation that reptilian control could operate by exploiting vulnerabilities in human cognition. To skeptics, it explains abduction accounts as products of suggestion rather than literal encounters. But whichever interpretation one accepts, the theme remains: the human mind is not inviolable. The broadest claim of all is that reptilians control humanity by structuring civilization itself to serve their needs. Wars generate fear, financial systems create dependency, religion demands obedience, media manipulates perception. At every level, the mechanisms of society mirror the strategies of control described in abduction accounts: paralyze, dominate, drain, and deceive. Whether this reflects actual reptilian overlords or human elites embodying the archetype, the result is the same: a system that keeps billions in line while a few reap the rewards. For believers, the consistency of these testimonies and the alignment with ancient myths is undeniable proof. For skeptics, they are metaphors projected onto a confusing world. Yet either way, the reptilian control narrative has become one of the most powerful explanatory frameworks in conspiracy culture. It ties together personal trauma, systemic corruption, and mythic archetypes into a single terrifying story. And if the stories are true, then every election, every war, every spectacle we consume may not be accidents of history or human failings at all. They may be the deliberate manipulations of hidden masters, reptilian in form and intention, feeding on our fear while we mistake their chains for our choices. Chapter 10. Science in Space. Scientific and astronomical perspectives. Skeptics often dismiss the reptilian narrative as fantasy, pointing out that it has no basis in science. Yet curiously, when biologists, paleontologists, and astronomers speculate about the possibilities of extraterrestrial life, they sometimes describe scenarios that align uncannily with reptilian lore. The idea of intelligent reptile-like beings evolving elsewhere is not as implausible as it first appears. If evolution tends to repeat certain patterns, then perhaps the reptilian form is not an anomaly of Earth, but a universal possibility. On our own planet, reptiles dominated long before mammals ever appeared. Dinosaurs ruled Earth for over 160 million years, while humans have existed for less than 1% of that time. Some paleontologists have speculated on what might have happened had dinosaurs not been wiped out by an asteroid 66 million years ago. In 1982, Canadian paleontologist Dale Russell proposed the dinosauroid thought experiment, a model of what an intelligent human-like dinosaur might have evolved into. His hypothetical creature had large eyes, grasping hands, and an upright posture. Though controversial, the concept demonstrated that intelligence was not exclusively mammalian. Given enough time, a reptilian species could have developed advanced cognition, social structures, and technology. Even among surviving reptiles today, there are hints of unexpected intelligence. Crocodiles, though ancient, exhibit complex social behaviors, coordinated hunting, and surprising problem-solving skills. Monitor lizards, particularly the Komodo dragon, have shown advanced predatory strategies. Studies of some bird species, descendants of theropod dinosaurs, reveal cognitive capacities rivaling primates, including tool use and symbolic communication. If intelligence can emerge in these lineages, then imagining reptilian civilizations on other planets is not far-fetched. Astrobiology widens the lens. The Kepler Space Telescope and other missions have revealed thousands of exoplanets, many within the so-called habitable zone. Worlds with stable climates, liquid water, and evolutionary pressures similar to Earth could produce intelligent life in forms very different from us. Scientists like Carl Sagan and Stephen Jay Gould speculated that while evolution is shaped by chance, certain outcomes like the development of eyes, limbs, and higher intelligence may be convergent. In other words, the universe might favor certain solutions. A reptilian body plan efficient for survival could emerge again and again across the stars. The Draco constellation, central to reptilian lore, has also captured human imagination for millennia. Thuban, a star within Draco, served as Earth's pole star around 2700 BCE, possibly guiding the construction of the Egyptian pyramids. For some researchers, it is no coincidence that serpent deities appear across ancient cultures while a serpent-shaped constellation dominated their skies. Conspiracy theorists point to this as evidence that the Draco system is the origin of the beings described by modern witnesses. While no direct evidence links Draco to extraterrestrial civilizations, the symbolic connection between a celestial serpent and terrestrial myths is powerful. The possibility of advanced reptilian civilizations is also framed by the Fermi paradox, the question of why in a galaxy with billions of habitable planets, we have not encountered obvious signs of extraterrestrials. One unsettling answer is that advanced civilizations may deliberately avoid contact or worse, manipulate emerging species in secrecy. To those who believe in reptilians, this aligns perfectly with the accounts. A civilization that did not announce itself, but chose instead to infiltrate, control, and feed. From a scientific standpoint, none of these ideas prove the existence of reptilians. Evolutionary speculation about dinosauroids, studies of reptile cognition, and astronomical musings about habitable exoplanets remain hypotheses, not evidence. Yet, the fact that mainstream science can imagine reptilian intelligence gives the conspiracy a veneer of plausibility. The archetype is not biologically impossible. It may be improbable, but it is not absurd. Where skeptics see coincidence, believers see validation. Ancient serpent myths, modern abduction testimonies, and the cold logic of evolutionary science converge on the same unsettling possibility: that reptilian intelligence may not only exist, but may have touched us before. The question is not simply whether such beings could evolve, but whether they already have, and whether they chose long ago to make humanity their project, their resource, or their prey. The stars of Draco still circle the night sky, silent reminders of an ancient serpent watching over Earth. Perhaps it is only symbolism, or perhaps it is memory, a cosmic trace of a civilization that has always been here, hidden, waiting. Chapter 11. Skeptical Views, Skeptical Explanations. For every believer who insists that reptilians are flesh and blood, beings manipulating humanity, there are skeptics who argue that the entire phenomenon can be explained without invoking aliens at all. To them, the reptilian archetype is not evidence of an underground empire or interstellar predators, but of the human mind, its fears, its projections, and its cultural imagination. Yet, even skeptics admit that the persistence of the reptilian image is striking and that dismissal does not erase the mystery. One of the most common explanations is psychological. Many abduction accounts occur during sleep paralysis, a state between waking and dreaming in which the body is paralyzed but the mind is partly conscious. In this condition, vivid hallucinations are common. Figures in the room, feelings of pressure on the chest, or sensations of being observed often occur, and the imagery may be drawn from cultural expectations. In societies steeped in alien lore, witnesses may interpret these experiences as abductions. Reptilian figures with their menacing appearance and cold dominance could simply be a projection of primal fear in moments of vulnerability. Others point to hypnagogic hallucinations in which the brain produces vivid sensory experiences as one falls asleep or wakes. These experiences can feel entirely real, complete with voices, smells, and physical sensations. For abductees convinced they were touched, paralyzed, or communicated with, skeptics argue that the brain itself can simulate all of these sensations without external beings present. Harvard psychologist Richard McNally has studied abductees and found that their physiological responses, sweating, trembling, stress, mirrored those of people recalling genuine trauma, even if the experiences were not real in an external sense. Cultural influence is another major factor. Science fiction has been populated with reptilian antagonists for decades. In 1967, Star Trek introduced the Gorn, a hulking reptilian warrior. In the 1980s, the miniseries Vive depicted human-looking aliens revealed to be reptilian overlords beneath their skin. Comic books, movies, and video games have repeatedly reinforced the trope. Skeptics argue that abductees unconsciously draw on this imagery, weaving it into their experiences. The viral reptilian politician videos, in this view, are not proof, but the result of digital glitches and confirmation bias, where people see what they expect to see. Folklore studies also offer context. Scholar Bill Ellis has argued that alien abduction narratives are a modern form of older supernatural tales, fairy kidnappings, demonic visitations, incubus encounters. In each era, the imagery reflects the culture's dominant fears. In medieval Europe, people saw demons. In the industrial age, they saw strange airships. In the space age, they see aliens. The reptilian archetype with its cold-blooded menace may simply be the newest mask of an old story. Even within ufology, some researchers reject the reptilian hypothesis. Jacques Vallée, who views UFOs as part of a control system interacting with human consciousness, argues that the phenomenon may be real, but not extraterrestrial in the conventional sense. To him, reptilians may be symbolic or interdimensional manifestations drawn from the archetypes of human fear. Others, like psychologist Chris French, argue that belief in reptilians spreads because it offers a coherent villain, a story that explains chaos in terms of a hidden enemy. Yet for all these explanations, something remains unresolved. If reptilians are merely hallucinations or cultural projections, why do so many testimonies converge on the same sensory details? The slit pupils, the sulfuric odor, the towering presence. Why do abductees from different continents, unaware of one another's stories, describe nearly identical experiences? Skeptics may answer that archetypes are shared unconsciously and that culture spreads more widely than we realize. But believers point to these consistencies as the strongest evidence that something more than psychology is at work. The skeptical lens is essential, grounding the debate in science, psychology, and cultural history. But even after these explanations are offered, the unease does not fade. The serpent remains coiled at the edge of our awareness, its gaze unblinking. Perhaps it is only our imagination, or perhaps it is something that uses our imagination as a mask, hiding in the very doubts we use to explain it away. Chapter 12: Cultural Legacy. Enduring cultural legacy, masters of control. The reptilian idea has survived not only because of myths, abduction accounts, or conspiracy theorists, but because it has been absorbed into culture itself. Once an obscure archetype, It has become a permanent fixture of modern imagination in film, television, internet memes, and online communities that keep the story alive. Whether people believe in them or not, the reptilians have achieved something remarkable. They have become symbols endlessly reproduced in art and entertainment, carrying their aura of menace into every medium. The roots of this legacy stretch back to television in the 1980s, when the miniseries Phi depicted human-looking aliens revealed to be reptilian overlords beneath their skin. Millions of viewers watched as familiar leaders and neighbors peeled away their human masks to reveal scales and slit eyes. The story was intended as allegory, a commentary on fascism and infiltration, but its imagery proved irresistible. For many, it was the first time the idea of reptilian shapeshifters entered mainstream consciousness. The legacy of V can be traced directly into the explosion of reptilian conspiracy memes decades later. In science fiction more broadly, reptilian antagonists became standard. From the Gorn in Star Trek to the lizard-like Silurians in Doctor Who, audiences were primed to see reptilian intelligence as plausible. Comic books and video games reinforced the image with reptilian villains symbolizing cold aggression and cunning. Even when presented as fiction, these portrayals fed back into conspiracy culture. Witnesses who claimed reptilian encounters could point to popular culture as validation, proof that society itself knew, even if it was expressed through entertainment. The internet amplified the archetype into a global meme. Online forums like Above Top Secret, Godlike Productions, and later Reddit provided spaces where reptilian discussions flourished. Videos alleging to show celebrities glitching into reptilian form spread virally on YouTube. One of the most famous cases involved Justin Bieber, where a tabloid rumor claimed fans had seen his eyes flash reptilian in court. The story was debunked, but the meme persisted, fueling countless parodies and conspiracy claims. Political figures from Barack Obama to Queen Elizabeth II became the subjects of similar viral edits, each one reinforcing the idea that powerful people were literally cold-blooded. These memes often began as satire, but became fuel for belief. Within conspiracy culture, humor and seriousness blur with jokes, serving as vehicles for darker suspicions. A photo of a politician mid-blink with eyes distorted by camera artifacts could be passed around as evidence of reptilian infiltration. In digital culture, the line between entertainment and evidence often dissolves, allowing the idea to spread endlessly. Reptilians also thrive because they embody anxieties about hidden power in a globalized age. In a world where multinational corporations, secretive financial institutions, and opaque governments wield enormous influence, the metaphor of reptilian control resonates: cold, calculating, detached from human empathy. These traits are easily mapped onto elites whose decisions seem inhuman to ordinary people. The conspiracy persists not only because it fascinates, but because it feels true, even if taken only symbolically. The endurance of the reptilian narrative also owes much to its ability to blend seamlessly with other conspiracies. It intersects with Illuminati lore, ufology, secret societies, bloodline theories, and even New Age spirituality. In doing so, it provides a unifying image, the cold-blooded overlord behind every system of control. This flexibility ensures that the reptilian never fades, but adapts to new cultural fears. Skeptics argue that this cultural saturation explains the phenomenon entirely. Reptilians endure not because they exist, but because they are compelling characters in the stories we tell ourselves. They represent the predator archetype in its most literal form, the outsider in our midst, the hidden ruler. Yet the persistence of the image across cultures, from ancient serpent myths to modern memes, suggests more than mere coincidence. If nothing else, it demonstrates the human tendency to give form to our unease, to make the invisible visible through the shape of the serpent. And so in the 21st century, the reptilian thrives not only in books and lectures, but in viral clips, streaming shows, and endless online debates. They have become cultural icons as recognizable as vampires or zombies, but with the added possibility that some people truly believe they are real. Whether laughed at or feared, parodied or preached, the serpent has entered the bloodstream of our culture and shows no sign of leaving. But cultural endurance leads inevitably to a deeper question. What if the stories are not just metaphor, but memory? What if the persistence of the serpent across millennia in scripture, myth, testimony, and meme reflects something real? An intelligence that has always been here, adapting its form as we adapt our stories. Perhaps the reptilians are literal beings, ancient and cold-blooded, who seeded our bloodlines and infiltrated our governments. Perhaps they are nothing more than archetypes, projections of our own fear of domination and predation. Or perhaps they are something stranger, intelligences that exist on the edge of our perception, not wholly physical, not wholly symbolic, but real enough to bend both mind and myth to their will. What is undeniable is their hold on us. Whether as rulers of shadow empires or as figures in pop culture, the reptilians remain. They thrive in our imaginations, in our fears, and perhaps in our very blood. They are the embodiment of our unease about power. Power that is hidden, inhuman, and beyond our control. Masters of control. Not because belief makes them real, but because they blur the line between myth and reality, leaving us unsure if they rule from the shadows or from our imagination. You may already be dreaming, but for those still awake, we'll continue with short stories, small glimpses into mysteries left unsolved. Ron Johnson, The MUFON Death Connection, June 9, 1994, Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri, USA. He had barely raised the glass to his lips when the convulsions began. In a crowded MUFON meeting in Missouri, colleagues watched in shock as Ron Johnson, a healthy man in his early 40s, known for his sharp mind and calm demeanor, collapsed at the table. Moments earlier, he had been discussing case files. His notes spread before him. Moments later, he was gone. The official cause of death was elusive. Toxicology offered no conclusive answer, but within the community of UFO investigators, the tragedy did not stand alone. Johnson had told friends in the weeks before that he had been warned, not warned about the health risks of late nights or travel, but by men who came quietly, their questions pointed, their message unmistakable. Stop asking. Ron Johnson was not a household name in the UFO field, but within MUFON, he was trusted. He had built a reputation for balance, skeptical when evidence was weak, open when witness accounts carried weight. Based in Missouri, he served as a state section director, managing local investigators and case files. He was the kind of member others turned to for steady judgment. He had worked on sightings that ranged from unexplained lights to close encounters involving physical traces. Johnson's calm manner made him a reliable presence for witnesses who feared ridicule. Farmers, teachers, and police officers who confided in him felt he would handle their accounts responsibly. He was not a sensationalist. He did not embellish. He documented with thoroughness, some believed, that drew attention from beyond MUFON's own circles. His notes were detailed, his files well organized, his questions precise, and weeks before his sudden death in June 1994, he hinted that his diligence had brought him into contact with forces he could not explain. Johnson described to at least 2 colleagues that he had been approached by men who identified themselves vaguely as officials. One encounter, he said, occurred after a regional MUFON meeting. As the crowd dispersed, 2 men in dark suits stood waiting near the exit. They addressed him by name before he introduced himself, and they steered him into a quiet conversation away from the others. Their manner was calm, but the questions they asked were sharper than anything he had faced before. They wanted to know what physical evidence MUFON currently held in Missouri. They asked specifically about a case involving trace samples collected from a field where a disc had been reported. They pressed him on whether the samples were in his possession or if copies of the analysis had been distributed. Johnson told a colleague later that their phrasing was odd, as though rehearsed. They did not ask casually. Each question came as a line delivered, clipped, and impersonal. When he attempted to clarify, to ask who they represented, they deflected, repeating only that they were from official channels. No agency, no badge, no paperwork was offered. The exchange grew more unsettling when one of the men leaned closer and lowered his voice. If Johnson intended to pursue certain leads, particularly those involving physical traces, it would be better for his health if he reconsidered. MUFON colleagues recalled Johnson's unease after that meeting. One said he returned to the table visibly shaken, his usual calm broken. Another remembered him shuffling his notes into his folder more quickly than usual, his eyes scanning the room. In the weeks that followed, he shared fragments of the story with trusted peers. One investigator later said Johnson described the men as official without being official. Another recalled that Johnson stressed their interest in files not yet public. A third remembered him saying, "They knew more about my cases than I had told anyone outside MUFON." Johnson laughed it off in public, joking about suits who knew too much, but those close to him sensed it was nervous humor. Privately, he admitted the encounter rattled him more than any skeptical challenge he had faced. His behavior began to shift. At meetings, he still contributed, but with greater caution. Where he once shared details freely, he now spoke in general terms. He began keeping his notes closed until it was his turn to speak, then sliding them back into his folder the moment discussion ended. At home, his family noticed his new habits. He drew the blinds earlier in the evening. He checked the street before opening the door. His wife later admitted that she did not know the full extent of what troubled him, only that he seemed more guarded, more watchful. A close friend described it simply: Ron looked like a man who'd been reminded that someone else was watching his work. On the day of his death, Johnson had been attending a routine MUFON gathering. He was not presenting a major paper or unveiling a new discovery. He was doing what he always did, contributing quietly, listening carefully, managing files. At some point in the meeting, he sipped from his glass. Minutes later, he convulsed. Witnesses described his collapse as sudden and violent. Medical help was summoned immediately, but nothing could be done. For MUFON members in the room, the shock was immediate. Johnson was not known to have serious health problems. His death, so sudden and so public, felt out of place, almost staged in its timing. The glass on the table became a silent point of speculation. Authorities handled the matter quickly. Toxicology tests were conducted, but produced no conclusive results. There was no trace of poison, no clear medical cause that could explain the collapse. The final report labeled it a sudden, unexplained death. Police did not treat the incident as suspicious. To them, it was an unfortunate tragedy, but nothing more. When MUFON members raised the possibility of prior warnings, officials dismissed the idea. If there are no toxins, there is no crime, one investigator was told. For MUFON, the inconclusiveness was more troubling than any definitive answer. A natural cause could at least be accepted, but a collapse with no explanation following weeks of reported intimidation fit too closely with a darker possibility. The impact on MUFON was immediate. Johnson had been well-liked and widely respected. His death created both grief and unease. Some members insisted it was a coincidence, a tragic medical event. Others whispered about the warnings, convinced his work had brought him into contact with forces determined to silence him. Several colleagues reduced their activity in the months that followed. Some declined to pursue cases involving physical evidence, citing concerns about unwanted attention. Others continued their work, but avoided sharing details as openly. A few withdrew from public UFO research altogether. One longtime MUFON investigator summarized the effect. Ron's death told us two things. First, we were vulnerable. Second, if there were lines we weren't supposed to cross, no one was going to tell us where they were until it was too late. Another MUFON member, reflecting years later, put it more simply: the message was received. Whether he died by chance or by hand, the effect was the same. We stepped back. Johnson's family bore the weight as well. They fielded calls from reporters and MUFON members, but they received little clarity from officials. The cause of death remained vague, the circumstances unresolved. His wife later said the hardest part was not knowing whether to believe in coincidence or connection. Ron believed he had been warned, she told a colleague. If he was right, then someone out there knows more than we ever will. For the witnesses Johnson had interviewed, the impact was quieter but real. Some wondered if their cases had drawn attention that led to his intimidation. Others hesitated to share details with MUFON after his death, fearing their testimony could carry unintended consequences. Over the years, Johnson's death became part of MUFON's internal history, spoken of carefully without sensationalism, but never forgotten. He was remembered not only for his investigations, but for the warnings he carried into his final weeks. His files remained, but they were read differently. Every case he had touched was now seen through the lens of his caution. If he had been pressured, then perhaps the information in those folders carried more weight than anyone realized. For the broader UFO research community, Johnson's story served as a reminder that investigators, not only witnesses, could be subject to intimidation. It suggested that the boundary between documenting and endangering oneself was thinner than many assumed. Today, Ron Johnson's name surfaces rarely outside MUFON circles. His death in 1994 remains officially unexplained, but unofficially tied in memory to the visits he described. Colleagues recall the man who joked about suits who knew too much, then grew guarded. They recall the investigator who said plainly that he had been warned. They recall the collapse at the table, the glass half full, the notes still in front of him. And they recall the silence that followed, the silence of unanswered questions, of colleagues who withdrew, of families who wondered, of a community left uncertain about what dangers came with the pursuit of truth. For Ron Johnson, the legacy was not only the cases he studied, it was a reminder that in the field of UFO research, the real weight sometimes came not from the lights in the sky, but from the men who appeared afterward, the ones whose warnings carried a finality that no file could capture. The RAF Bentwaters audio tape, December 26 to 28, 1980, Suffolk, England. The static cuts in. There's no doubt about it. There's some strange flashing red light ahead. A voice says, hushed and tense, click. Then another voice. It's definitely coming this way. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. The timestamp on the cassette recorder reads 2 a.m. The voices belong to U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt and his security team. They are deep in the Rendlesham Forest near RAF Bentwaters, a British base leased to the United States during the Cold War. It's the second night of a UFO sighting that has baffled personnel and challenged official accounts for over 4 decades. But the difference with this case, the entire event was recorded live in real time. What unfolded over those 3 days in December 1980 would become one of the most thoroughly documented UFO events in history, not because of radar or blurry footage or secondhand interviews, but because the base's second-in-command held a tape recorder in his hand and captured it all. This wasn't a farmer or civilian describing strange lights. This was the deputy base commander of a joint NATO air base housing nuclear weapons describing an encounter with something unknown, unexplainable, and by all indications technologically superior. It began on the night of December 26th when Airman First Class John Burroughs and Sergeant Bud Steffens saw lights descending into the woods beyond the perimeter fence. Thinking an aircraft might have gone down, they alerted control. They were authorized to investigate, accompanied by Airman Jim Peniston. What they found defied explanation. They described a triangular craft with glowing panels, roughly 9 ft wide and 6 ft high. It hovered just above the forest floor, completely silent. Peniston got close enough to touch it. He later claimed to see strange symbols etched into the hull like hieroglyphs. The craft soon lifted vertically through the trees and vanished in the blink of an eye. The next day, Peniston began experiencing vivid dreams, including sequences of binary code that he compulsively wrote down. He would later hand those notes to researchers, sparking decades of debate. Base leadership initially dismissed the incident, but then came the second night. Colonel Charles Halt, skeptical at first, was told strange lights were seen again in the woods. Determined to put the matter to rest, he assembled a team of security police, brought a handheld radiation meter, a starlight scope, and crucially, a cassette tape recorder. What he captured would become known as the Halt tape. For 18 minutes, the tape documents Halt and his men encountering a pulsing, red glowing object in the woods. They take radiation readings at the landing site and find physical depressions in the ground. Then the object moves silently, weaving through the trees before shooting skyward and emitting beams of light downward, one of which lands directly at their feet. We're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. Halt exclaims, "This is unreal." Multiple lights appeared in the sky that night, some maneuvering at impossible angles. Halt and his team chased them through the forest, relaying real-time observations into the recorder. Their voices are calm but urgent, trained officers clearly disturbed. That audio, grainy, eerie, and genuine, would become one of the most damning pieces of UFO evidence ever released. No speculation, no storytelling, just military professionals caught in the moment of direct, unexplained contact. The British Ministry of Defense initially showed little interest. Their official stance, repeated for decades, was that the incident posed no threat to national security, but documents obtained later via Freedom of Information requests revealed that the Ministry of Defense was quietly tracking the case, with memos referencing unidentified aerial phenomena over RAF Bentwaters and nearby RAF Woodbridge. U.S. authorities were even more elusive. The incident report that Halt filed, known as the Halt Memo, was classified and buried for years until it was leaked to the public. It described a possible unidentified craft sighting, including impressions in the ground, elevated radiation levels, and visual confirmation from multiple USAF personnel. To this day, neither government has offered an explanation, and the witnesses never recanted. Peniston and Burroughs both maintained their testimony, though their stories later diverged. Peniston claimed the craft communicated with him telepathically. Burroughs years later would suffer medical complications and fought a legal battle with the VA. His case was strengthened by the eventual declassification of the fact that RAF Bentwaters stored tactical nuclear weapons at the time, something previously denied by both governments. Even more curiously, Burroughs was eventually granted full medical disability coverage for injuries sustained during the Rendlesham event. The court ruling acknowledged he had been exposed to an unidentified phenomenon during service. That admission alone stands as a rare, if indirect, acknowledgement that something extraordinary happened in those woods. In 2010, Colonel Halt broke years of silence. At a conference in Washington, D.C., he stated publicly, "This was not some figment of imagination. I saw it. Many others saw it. It was real." He then added that radar operators from RAF Watton had tracked a fast-moving object during the event, but were told to keep quiet. The story gained traction again in the 2010s, with renewed interest from UFO researchers and journalists. The British Ministry of Defense released further documents, many heavily redacted, and once again asserted that no threat was found, but the evidence persisted. The Halt tape was analyzed for authenticity and declared consistent with 1980s-era cassette recordings. It was not edited, and the ambient forest sounds matched the Rendlesham environment. Ground impressions photographed at the scene matched a tripod pattern. Radiation levels taken by Halt's team showed anomalies above background norms. Multiple airmen submitted sworn affidavits about what they witnessed. And the most damning evidence of all, silence. To this day, neither the US nor UK governments have offered a plausible explanation for what was seen. No aircraft was reported missing. No experimental flight tests were scheduled. The weather was clear. The radar blips were real. The audio is real. The witnesses are real. And the event remains unsolved. Unlike Roswell, there were no recovered materials. Unlike Phoenix, there was no mass civilian sighting. But what makes Rendlesham and the Halt tape in particular so powerful is the immediacy. You are there. You hear the tension, the confusion, the wonder, and you hear it in real time. Colonel Halt has since said, "I wish this had never happened, but it did, and the evidence is there." Perhaps it's fitting that this incident, one of the clearest and most official UFO encounters in modern history, happened not in secrecy, but in sound. Recorded on a simple tape deck carried by a skeptical officer who simply wanted to get to the truth. He did, and he pressed record. The Tehran dogfight incident, September 19, 1976, Tehran, Iran. The night skies over Tehran crackled with tension. It was just past midnight on September 19, 1976. Civilians in the northern suburbs looked up and froze. A strange, bright object hovered silently above the city, unnaturally still, intensely luminous, and completely unidentifiable. Some thought it was a helicopter, others whispered of a missile, but it made no sound. And when they reached for phones, they found that many landlines had gone dead. At Mehrabad International Airport, calls poured into the control tower from frantic residents. Something was in the sky, too low, too bright, and too silent to be ignored. The Iranian Air Force was alerted, and a decision was made quickly: scramble fighters. What followed would become one of the most astonishing close encounters in military history, one where radar locks failed, weapon systems were disabled, and seasoned pilots were left shaken by an object that defied all known physics. Major Parviz Jafari was the second pilot sent that night to intercept the unknown object. A respected and experienced officer, he took off in his F-4 Phantom from Cherokee Air Base. The first interceptor, sent 30 minutes earlier, had been forced to retreat when its instruments failed as it approached the target. Now Jafari was airborne, climbing to 23,000 FT, determined to confront whatever had invaded Iranian airspace. As he approached, Jafari radioed the tower. "I have it visually," he reported. "It is a bright object. It is flashing with intense red, green, orange, and blue lights. It is changing shape." His radar operator confirmed the contact. The blip was large, comparable to a Boeing 707, but the object made no sound and hovered effortlessly in place. Jafari closed to within 25 nautical miles. Suddenly, a smaller object detached from the main one and darted straight toward his jet. Instinctively, he reached for the missile switch and tried to fire. Nothing happened. His weapons control panel went dead. So did his radio. The cockpit lights blinked out, leaving him in darkness. He turned away, evasively diving, and the smaller object broke off pursuit and returned to the larger craft. As he regained control, Jafari witnessed the original object descend rapidly toward the Earth, appearing to land softly just outside Tehran. As he circled to observe the area, yet another object emerged from the craft and circled his position at incredible speed. Again, the aircraft's electronics failed. He broke off and returned to base, still shaken and unable to explain what he had just seen. Meanwhile, civilian witnesses on the ground reported the same strange lights and heard nothing. No engines, no rotors, just silence. When Jafari landed, he was debriefed by high-level officers and intelligence personnel. His jet systems were inspected. No faults were found. The failure had been temporary and only occurred during the encounter. The Iranian Air Force filed a full incident report and sent it to the U.S. Defense Attaché office in Tehran. That report was then relayed to Washington. It wasn't dismissed or ignored. It reached high-level attention, including the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, and the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. A declassified DIA report dated October 1976 details the event with remarkable clarity. It confirms that both F-4s experienced radar lock-ons, followed by total electronic failure when closing in on the object. It notes the glowing craft was visible to both pilots and ground control, and it specifically mentions the detachment of smaller maneuverable objects. Perhaps most shockingly, the report states, "This case is a classic which meets all the criteria necessary for a valid study of the UFO phenomenon. The object was seen by multiple witnesses from different locations, both air and ground. The credibility of many witnesses was high. An experienced Air Force general was a witness, and the object exhibited extraordinary flight characteristics." The event occurred at the height of the Cold War. Iran was a U.S. ally, and the Shah's military was one of the most well-funded in the region. The U.S. was deeply invested in Iranian air defense capabilities. This wasn't a case of misidentified civilian lights or a pilot hallucination. The U.S. took it seriously. In fact, former NSA and CIA officers have confirmed that this case was circulated among top intelligence circles for years. It was referenced in later briefings on unexplained aerial threats. The U.S. government never officially explained the incident, and to this day, no known aircraft, foreign or domestic, has been identified as responsible. Theories emerged, of course. Skeptics suggested a misidentified satellite, atmospheric anomalies, or electronic malfunction, but none could explain how two separate jets lost identical systems at the exact moment of visual and radar contact. Nor could they explain the witnessed maneuvering of multiple objects or the ground-level sightings corroborating the pilot's account. Major Jafari, who later rose to the rank of general, remained consistent in his account. In interviews decades later, he recalled the encounter with clarity. "The object was beyond anything I'd ever seen," he stated. "It moved in ways that no aircraft, ours or theirs, could. I thought it was going to destroy me. I wanted to fire, and my system shut down." He later testified before the Disclosure Project in 2001, stating under oath that the object was real, intelligently controlled, and displayed technologies far beyond any known aircraft. His statements have never changed. Iranian radar operators who worked that night also confirmed tracking the object. At one point, radar locked onto a secondary object traveling at over Mach 3, 3 times the speed of sound. That's faster than most military aircraft of the era and consistent with no known drone or missile at the time. The landing site just outside Tehran was investigated by military ground teams. Some claimed to see a scorched area and unusual radiation readings, though no samples or documentation were ever made public. Despite repeated efforts by researchers and journalists, most official Iranian files remain classified, but enough pieces have surfaced. Witness testimony, the US DIA report, flight logs, and radar data to make the Tehran incident one of the most compelling military UFO encounters ever documented. It checks every box: multiple credible witnesses, physical effects, instrument failure, radar confirmation, and intelligent control. And yet, it's rarely discussed publicly, buried under decades of secrecy and geopolitical tension. Unlike many UFO tales, this one didn't come from a civilian or a fringe believer. It came from a military pilot trusted with national defense, and it was confirmed by the military of not just one, but 2 nations. No one has ever found a prosaic explanation. Not the Shah's government, not the Americans, not skeptics. In the shadow of history, the Tehran dogfight incident remains one of the most chilling reminders that something, not ours, not theirs, shares the skies above. Johannesburg schoolyard sighting, 1972, South Africa. In the spring of 1972, the schoolyard of a Johannesburg primary school was alive with its usual midday rhythm. Boys kicked a battered football across the dusty ground. Younger children clambered up and down makeshift climbing bars, and teachers watched from verandas shaded by corrugated tin roofs. The air carried the smell of chalk from classrooms and the faint tang of dust kicked up by dozens of running feet. It was an ordinary day under an ordinary sky. Then a ripple passed through the yard. The noise of laughter and shouts began to fade, replaced by murmurs and then silence. One by one, children lifted their eyes upward. A boy stopped mid-kick. A girl caught in the act of chasing her friend froze in place. Something was in the sky above them, and it was nothing they had seen before. Suspended high above the schoolyard was a disc-shaped object, metallic and gleaming in the noonday sun. It was broad, flat, and impossibly silent. Teachers at first thought the children were playing a game until they too followed the pointing fingers and saw it for themselves. Against the blue sky, the craft reflected sunlight in quick flashes, tilting slightly as though adjusting its position. Unlike a plane, it had no wings or tail. Unlike a balloon, it did not drift with the breeze. It hovered, deliberate and motionless, as if it was watching. Shouts erupted. Some of the older boys ran to the edge of the playground, pressing against the wire fence to keep it in sight. Younger children clutched one another, frightened and wide-eyed. Teachers stepped into the open, trying to quiet the noise, but their own voices carried a tremor. They too were staring, transfixed. One later admitted that her first thought was of a weather balloon, but she abandoned the idea almost immediately. Balloons do not stop and start. Balloons do not shimmer with metallic edges, and balloons do not vanish with the kind of speed the object would soon display. For several minutes, the scene held like a photograph. 100 children below, frozen between fear and amazement, and above them, a silent disc tilting and gliding, as though surveying the yard. Some pupils insisted they saw a faint dome on top. Others described a ring of light along the underside, pale and bluish, almost too dim to notice until one looked directly. A science teacher who watched from the veranda said the movements were deliberate, mechanical, and unlike any natural phenomenon. And then it was gone. With no warning, the craft tilted sharply and shot upward at an angle so steep and fast that witnesses gasped. In seconds, it was a glinting speck and then nothing. The yard erupted again, but this time in panic. Some children cried openly, convinced they had seen something dangerous. Others shouted excitedly, running from group to group, comparing what they had noticed. One boy claimed he had seen windows on the dome. Another girl insisted she had seen smaller lights flickering beneath the disc. The teachers gathered their pupils, hurrying them back toward classrooms, though they themselves whispered urgently about what they had seen. Parents heard the story that very afternoon. Dozens of children carried home the same tale, a metallic disc hovering over their playground, then vanishing skyward in a burst of speed. Many mothers and fathers dismissed it at first until they realized the children's descriptions matched one another, almost word for word. By evening, parents who had spoken to teachers learned that the adults too had seen it, and skepticism turned to unease. Within days, the local paper, the Rand Daily Mail, printed a small article. The headline read simply, "Strange object reported over Johannesburg school." It quoted unnamed teachers who confirmed that they and their students had witnessed an unusual craft. The article avoided speculation, but the fact that adults were willing to stand by the account made the report harder to ignore. In the weeks that followed, amateur investigators visited the school. They interviewed children one by one, asking them to draw what they had seen. The sketches, gathered separately, showed the same broad disc with a dome and faint underside glow. A researcher later remarked that the consistency across age groups was extraordinary. Children too young to grasp what UFOs were nonetheless drew almost identical shapes. The South African UFO Bureau quietly logged the incident, though the government issued no official statement. Some believe the South African Air Force kept its own file. Military intelligence in the 1970s was heavily guarded, and public discussion of unexplained aerial objects was discouraged. Yet, whispers persisted among researchers that radar operators at a nearby base had logged unusual returns on the day of the sighting. Skeptics offered alternative explanations, but none fit well. Some suggested the children saw a misidentified aircraft, but the silence and hovering contradicted that. Weather balloons were floated as an explanation, yet no balloon could dart away at such speed. Others pointed to mass hysteria, a known phenomenon among school children. But the presence of multiple teachers, their careful testimony, and the consistent details across dozens of witnesses made hysteria alone implausible. The event did not occur in isolation. The 1970s saw numerous reports of strange aerial objects across South Africa. Pilots near Cape Town reported glowing discs pacing their planes. Farmers near Pretoria described metallic objects over their fields. In 1974, residents outside Port Elizabeth would later claim to find physical traces from a close encounter. In this context, the Johannesburg schoolyard incident became part of a wider tapestry of sightings. For the children who witnessed it, the memory stayed fresh into adulthood. Decades later, some still spoke of the day when recess turned into an encounter with the unknown. They recalled the silence in the air, the shimmer of the object, and the way the sky swallowed it in an instant. One former pupil interviewed as an adult said simply, "It wasn't a balloon, it wasn't a plane, we all saw it. It changed the way I thought about the world." Teachers too carried the memory. Long retired, some admitted privately that the incident still puzzled them. They remembered the way the object moved against all logic and the shock in their students' eyes. They remembered trying to reassure children while knowing they themselves had no explanation. Internationally, the case was little known, overshadowed later by the famous 1994 Rua incident in Zimbabwe, where school children claimed direct contact with beings from a landed craft. Yet, in many ways, Johannesburg was its precursor. It carried the same elements: a schoolyard, broad daylight, a hovering disc, dozens of witnesses, and the enduring inability of adults to explain what had happened. The story passed into local lore, whispered among parents, retold by families who still lived in the area. It never reached the level of myth because it had too many real witnesses to be dismissed as invention. Instead, it settled into memory as a shared experience, a moment when something extraordinary broke into the ordinary lives of children and teachers in Johannesburg. Today, those children are grown, many with grandchildren of their own. Yet ask them, and they still describe the same sight: a metallic disc floating silently over their playground, a ring of light, a sudden impossible acceleration. They remember the way the world seemed to stop, the way they realized that the sky held mysteries far beyond their understanding. The Johannesburg schoolyard sighting remains unexplained. No experimental aircraft, no meteorological anomaly, no trick of the light has ever matched the testimony. For the witnesses, it is not speculation, but lived history as vivid as any memory of their childhood. And for researchers, it remains one of the clearest reminders that the extraordinary does not always happen in remote places at night, but sometimes in broad daylight, in the most ordinary of settings, a schoolyard full of children looking up at the sky. Ellsworth AFB B-52 encounter 1953. On a summer night in 1953, the quiet expanse of the South Dakota prairie carried the low, steady thunder of bombers from Ellsworth Air Force Base. The base near Rapid City was one of the United States' key installations during the early Cold War. From here, Strategic Air Command aircraft trained for long-range missions, and radar crews maintained constant watch over the northern skies. It was routine, disciplined, and familiar. But one night, a B-52 bomber crew, radar operators, and base personnel reported an encounter that was anything but routine, an event that would be filed into Project Blue Book as one of its enduring radar visual mysteries. The incident began just before midnight as a B-52 crew was flying a training mission over South Dakota. At altitude, the aircraft's radar picked up an unusual return. At first, the crew assumed it might be another aircraft, but the blip's movement was irregular. It darted quickly across the scope, then held still before moving again at incredible speed. The pilot, a seasoned Air Force officer, contacted Ellsworth's ground controllers to ask if they had any traffic in the area. The answer was no. Yet within minutes, Ellsworth's ground radar also picked up the object. Controllers confirmed what the crew had already seen: a strong, solid target with extraordinary movement. Visually, the crew soon spotted it as well. Out of the darkness, a bright object appeared, luminous and oval-shaped, holding position parallel to the bomber's flight path. It seemed to pace them, maintaining distance, but clearly visible. The glow was steady, not flickering like a star or planet. At times, it seemed to pulse faintly, as if energy radiated from its surface. The pilot banked the B-52, trying to close the gap. Each time the object responded, accelerating effortlessly to maintain distance. The bomber's crew described it as if the object were aware of their attempts, adjusting intelligently to avoid approach. One officer later remarked that it felt like a game of tag, only we were hopelessly outmatched. On the ground, radar operators at Ellsworth tracked the same movements in real time. The object's abrupt shifts and bursts of speed were not illusions. They registered as solid radar returns. Controllers logged the blip, zigzagging across the screen, then vanishing, only to reappear moments later, miles away. As the encounter continued, additional personnel at Ellsworth stepped outside to watch. Several guards reported seeing a glowing object in the sky, moving with unusual agility. Their reports matched what the B-52 crew and radar operators were describing. The event lasted for nearly half an hour. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the object accelerated upward, climbing vertically at astonishing speed until it disappeared from both sight and radar. The skies over South Dakota were quiet once again, leaving the bomber crew and controllers unsettled and puzzled. In the days that followed, detailed reports were filed. The B-52 crew described the object as structured, glowing, and clearly under control. Radar logs from both the aircraft and the base confirmed a solid target, exhibiting maneuvers beyond conventional aircraft. Ground witnesses corroborated the visual descriptions. When Project Blue Book investigators arrived, they collected the testimony and reviewed the radar records. The consistency of the reports made the case difficult to dismiss. Pilots, radar operators, and ground observers had all described the same thing at the same time in the same area. Still, Blue Book attempted explanations. Analysts suggested atmospheric phenomena such as anomalous propagation of radar signals caused by temperature inversions. Perhaps the crew and ground observers had misidentified stars or planets distorted by atmospheric conditions. But these explanations faltered against the testimony. Pilots familiar with celestial navigation did not mistake stars for glowing maneuvering objects. Radar operators trained to recognize false returns insisted the object's movements were real, not atmospheric artifacts. In the end, Blue Book quietly classified the case as unidentified. It was one of many incidents in which the evidence was too strong to explain away, yet too politically sensitive to acknowledge publicly. For the B-52 crew, the memory lingered. They had faced an object that outpaced their bomber, evaded every attempt at approach, and displayed control and intelligence. To them, it was not a natural phenomenon. It was something structured, technological, and unknown. The Ellsworth encounter was not an isolated incident. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, UFOs were repeatedly reported near strategic air command bases and nuclear installations. Malmstrom, Minot, and other northern bases would all log similar sightings: glowing objects tracked on radar, pacing bombers, and hovering over missiles. Some researchers argue that these incidents suggest a focused interest in America's nuclear arsenal. Civilian investigators later highlighted the Ellsworth case as one of Blue Book's stronger entries. It combined multiple data sources: radar, visual, ground, and airborne witnesses, with no satisfactory explanation. For NICAP and other research groups, it was clear evidence that the Air Force was downplaying serious encounters. Skeptics, as always, offered alternatives. Some argued for meteors, which can produce bright lights and radar returns. Others suggested misidentifications of aircraft lights, but meteors do not hover, pace bombers, or reappear in the same area after vanishing. Aircraft lights cannot account for radar returns moving at thousands of miles per hour. For those who experienced it, there was no doubt. They had been shadowed by something extraordinary over the South Dakota plains, something that displayed capabilities far beyond anything in human hands. The Ellsworth B-52 encounter reflects the larger tension within Project Blue Book. Cases like this, well-documented, multi-witness radar visual events, were acknowledged quietly but rarely publicized. They were filed as unknowns, but the Air Force preferred to emphasize the majority of sightings it could explain. In doing so, it buried some of its strongest evidence in plain sight. Today, the Ellsworth case stands as a reminder of that buried evidence. It shows how even in 1953, highly trained personnel were reporting encounters that defied explanation, encounters that hinted at technology beyond the known. For the men of that B-52 and the controllers at Ellsworth, the night was unforgettable. They had looked into the sky and seen something that should not have been there, something that evaded pursuit, mocked their instruments, and vanished into the stars. And though Project Blue Book filed it away, the memory of that luminous intruder over South Dakota remains. Another fragment of history preserved in testimony and radar logs, pointing toward a mystery that still endures. Portland, Oregon Airlines sighting 1947. The summer of 1947 had already been extraordinary in the annals of American aviation. Just weeks earlier, Kenneth Arnold had reported seeing a formation of flying saucers skipping across the sky near Mount Rainier, sparking the modern UFO era. The Roswell incident followed days later, igniting speculation about crash disks and secret military recoveries. In that fevered atmosphere, airline crews became especially alert to anything unusual in the sky. And on July 4th, 1947, Independence Day itself, a United Airlines flight crew witnessed a formation of strange objects in the skies over Portland, Oregon that would become one of Project Blue Book's earliest and most intriguing cases. The flight was United Airlines 105 en route from Boise to Seattle. On board were Captain Emil J. Smith, First Officer Ralph Stevens, and Stewardess Marty Morrow. They were all seasoned professionals with years of experience and thousands of hours of flight time. Around 9:30 p.m., as they approached the Portland area, the crew noticed something strange outside the cockpit window. Ahead of them, at roughly the same altitude, were 9 objects flying in formation. They glowed faintly, reflecting the fading light of dusk, and moved with precision. At first, Captain Smith thought they might be other aircraft, perhaps a group of military planes flying maneuvers, but something was wrong. The objects were too evenly spaced, too silent, and their appearance was unlike any conventional aircraft. Smith and Stevens watched closely as the formation crossed their path. The objects were disc-like, flat, and luminous. They maintained a tight line, banking and shifting in unison. Their movement was smooth, deliberate, and startlingly fast. Both pilots immediately realized they were looking at something they could not identify. Stewardess Morrow was called into the cockpit to witness the objects as well. She confirmed what the pilot saw: a formation of glowing saucer-shaped craft flying at an estimated speed well beyond that of conventional airplanes. For several minutes, the crew observed them, noting their altitude, speed, and course. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the objects faded into the distance, vanishing against the horizon. Upon landing, Captain Smith wasted no time filing a report. His account was clear, professional, and measured. He described 9 unidentified objects flying in formation with a shape and motion inconsistent with any known aircraft. Importantly, both his first officer and stewardess corroborated the sighting. The fact that multiple crew members had seen the same thing eliminated the possibility of an individual illusion or misinterpretation. The Air Force, newly tasked with investigating such reports under Project Sign, which would later evolve into Project Blue Book, took the case seriously. Investigators interviewed Smith and his crew in detail. Their testimony was consistent, precise, and devoid of exaggeration. These were not excitable amateurs. They were airline professionals accustomed to identifying planes, atmospheric conditions, and astronomical objects. At first, the Air Force sought conventional explanations. Could the crew have seen reflections from the ground, or perhaps a flight of military aircraft? Yet no known formations were operating in that area at the time. The descriptions did not match standard aircraft silhouettes, and the silence of the objects ruled out engines. Astronomical explanations also failed. These were not stars or planets, as they were seen moving across the sky at high speed holding tight formation. The official file eventually classified the Portland airline sighting as unidentified. For the Air Force, it was an inconvenient case so soon after Arnold's famous report. Together, the two sightings painted a picture of multiple credible witnesses describing formations of disc-shaped craft flying at extraordinary speed. For Captain Smith, the experience was unforgettable. In later years, he remained firm in his conviction that he had seen genuine structured craft of unknown origin. He rejected explanations that reduced the sighting to meteors, birds, or illusions. "We saw them," he insisted. "They were real and they were solid." The Portland sighting carried extra weight because it came from airline pilots, professionals whose reputations depended on accuracy and calm judgment. In 1947, commercial aviation was still establishing its place in American life. The public trusted airline pilots as the epitome of reliable witnesses, and their testimony carried more authority than that of ordinary citizens. In the broader context, the Portland sighting was part of a wave that swept the United States in the summer of 1947. Kenneth Arnold's flying saucers near Mount Rainier had opened the floodgates. Within days, dozens of similar reports emerged across the country, describing disc-shaped objects moving at high speed. The United Airlines crew's account added a layer of professional credibility that could not be ignored. Researchers later noted striking similarities between Arnold's report and the Portland sighting. Both involved multiple luminous discs flying in formation, moving with speeds estimated at over 1,000 km/h. Both occurred in the Pacific Northwest within days of each other, and both came from highly credible observers. Arnold, a respected businessman and pilot, and Smith, a veteran airline captain. For Project Sign and later Blue Book, such cases were deeply troubling. They could not be dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications by untrained eyes. They were solid, consistent reports from individuals whose livelihoods depended on accurate observation. The Portland case in particular suggested that the skies over the US were being traversed by unknown craft, seen by professionals, yet unacknowledged by authorities. Decades later, researchers continued to revisit the Portland sighting. Some skeptics attempted to explain it as reflections from city lights or high-altitude aircraft, but these theories failed under scrutiny. The behavior of the objects, their formation, speed, and disc-like shape simply did not fit. Others suggested meteors, but meteors do not fly in formation or maintain level flight paths. The case also attracted attention because of its timing, July 4, 1947. On the very day Americans celebrated independence, a crew of airline professionals reported seeing 9 disc-shaped objects crossing the skies of Oregon. To some, the symbolism was striking, a reminder that human independence might be dwarfed by forces beyond our comprehension. For UFO historians, the Portland sighting remains one of the early pillars of the phenomenon. It came at a time when the Air Force was just beginning to grapple with the flood of reports that would define the coming decades. It highlighted the credibility of airline crews as witnesses and underscored the inadequacy of conventional explanations. In the end, the Portland sighting was filed away in the Blue Book archives, another unidentified among hundreds, but its significance endures. It stands as an early credible case that helped establish the seriousness of the UFO phenomenon in the modern era. For Captain Smith, First Officer Stevens, and Stewardess Morrow, that night over Oregon was more than just another flight. It was a moment when the familiar routines of aviation collided with the unknown. Their testimony, preserved in official records, remains a quiet but powerful reminder. Sometimes even the most experienced eyes see things that defy explanation. And on that Independence Day in 1947, as fireworks lit up the ground below, something extraordinary moved silently through the skies above. The Kaikoura Lights. December 31st, 1978, near Kaikoura, South Island, New Zealand. The skies along New Zealand's South Island were calm on New Year's Eve in 1978. High above the dark stretch of coastline near Kaikoura, a Safe Air Argosy cargo aircraft made its routine southbound run toward Christchurch. The route was familiar to both crew and company, a quiet, dependable link between the islands. But this night, there was something different on board. Alongside the two pilots in the cockpit, a small television news team had set up cameras in the rear cabin. Reporter Dennis Grant, cameraman Quentin Fogarty, and sound operator Ingrid McGee were documenting the area after a series of strange aerial sightings had been reported along the coast in recent weeks. They had come prepared to film the empty night sky and interview the crew, never expecting their equipment would capture anything unusual in real time. Captain Bill Startup, a seasoned pilot with both commercial and military flight experience, was at the controls. Beside him, First Officer Bob Guard managed navigation and radio traffic. Their flight was unremarkable until somewhere over the dark waters east of the South Island, Startup caught sight of a light. It was low on the horizon to the right of the aircraft, brighter than a star and steady against the backdrop of night. It was not the slow, swaying glow of a fishing boat, nor the quick blink of a navigation beacon. The light appeared fixed in space. Yet, as the Argosy advanced, it began to keep pace. Startup pointed it out to Guard, who confirmed he saw it too. They called Wellington Air Traffic Control, requesting a radar check. The controller's voice came back with something unexpected. Radar was also showing an unknown contact in their vicinity, matching the location the pilots were giving. The radar return was clear, holding its position alongside the aircraft. In the cabin, Fogarty adjusted his camera, pressing it to the window as the light stayed with them. Through the lens, it sometimes appeared as a perfect sphere of white, other times stretching slightly into an ellipse with a faint surrounding halo. The object kept station for several minutes, its brightness unwavering. Then, without warning, it surged forward. The acceleration was smooth and deliberate, carrying it ahead of the Argosy until it was well in front of their flight path. It descended briefly toward the ocean, then rose again in a shallow climb. Air traffic control confirmed that the radar target had just performed the same maneuver the pilots described. A second light appeared soon after, this time to the left. Smaller, but equally bright, it approached from the darkness over the water. At its closest, it seemed just over a mile away, intense enough that its glow lit the edges of the cockpit and reflected faintly off the instrument panels. Startup and Guard exchanged quick glances. They had flown thousands of hours between them, and neither had seen anything like it. From the cabin, the news team continued filming, fighting the difficulties of night shooting through aircraft glass. The footage would later show glowing forms that pulsed, changed shape, and sometimes appeared surrounded by a diffuse haze. As the Argosy continued toward Christchurch, the lights would vanish from view, only to reappear miles away, sometimes pacing the aircraft again, sometimes darting ahead or off to one side. Each appearance was confirmed by radar operators whose scopes showed sudden accelerations and abrupt stops that no conventional aircraft could match. The flight landed without incident, but the atmosphere on the ground was charged. The crew, the journalists, and the controllers all knew they had participated in something unusual. The footage reels were secured immediately, and within hours prints were being developed. The next day, the Royal New Zealand Air Force was informed. Given the recent string of sightings in the area, the RNZAF treated the report seriously. Officers were dispatched to interview the pilots, the news crew, and the radar operators at both Wellington and Christchurch. They requested copies of the raw film, radar logs, and positional data for the flight. Startup and Guard described the objects as large, intensely bright and capable of rapid movement in any direction. They noted the absence of any navigation lights or transponder signals, and the fact that the lights' maneuvers were too controlled to be the result of drifting balloons or natural phenomena. The television crew's testimony matched the pilots in every detail. Quentin Fogarty explained how difficult it was to keep the lights in focus because of their unpredictable movements, yet the brightness made them impossible to lose entirely. Dennis Grant confirmed that at no point did the lights resemble ordinary aircraft. Their sudden accelerations and sharp changes in direction ruled out anything conventional. Air traffic controllers provided equally clear accounts. In Wellington, radar tracked a target pacing the Argosy for nearly 20 minutes before it shot ahead and disappeared. In Christchurch, multiple unknown returns were seen in the approach corridor, appearing and vanishing in sync with the pilot's reports. When the RNZAF examined the film, photographic analysts concluded that the changing shapes of the lights were consistent with real variations in the source, not simply camera or lens effects. Weather data was reviewed, and no atmospheric conditions were found that could cause simultaneous radar and visual observations in the patterns described. In their internal summary, the RNZAF noted, multiple visual and radar contacts observed by trained personnel on 31 December 1978 in the Kaikoura area. No known aircraft movements in area at relevant times. Observed performance exceeds known capabilities of conventional aviation assets. Public attention was immediate. Newspaper headlines spoke of Kaikoura UFOs, and television broadcasts ran segments from the footage showing strange lights dancing over the Black Sea. Some skeptics proposed explanations ranging from Venus to fishing vessels to lights reflected from the deck of the aircraft itself. But these suggestions struggled against the combined witness testimony and the radar evidence that tracked objects moving independently in open airspace. The Kaikoura lights did not happen in isolation. Just 10 days earlier, on December 21st, another Safe Air Argosy had reported bright, unexplained lights along the same route, also tracked on radar. That earlier sighting had prompted the television crew to join the New Year's Eve flight, the very one that unexpectedly produced the now famous film. In the months that followed, the footage circulated among researchers in Australia, the United States, and Europe. Many regarded it as one of the strongest UFO cases of the late 20th century, not because the light's nature was known, but because of the rare combination of trained visual witnesses, multiple radar confirmations, and professional film recorded during the event itself. The lights never returned in quite the same way. There were occasional reports from Kaikoura in the following years, but none with the same combination of evidence. For startup, guard, and the television crew, the night became a fixed memory. A routine flight transformed into something that resisted explanation from the moment it happened. The coastline eventually returned to its usual quiet. The night flights over the South Island resumed their uneventful patterns. The sea below dotted only with the steady glow of fishing boats. But for those who were in the Argosy cabin and cockpit that New Year's Eve, the memory of bright maneuvering objects pacing their aircraft and the knowledge that radar confirmed them remains clear. The Kaikoura lights endure in New Zealand's aviation history as a rare moment when the unexplained was witnessed, recorded, and tracked all at once. The film, the logs, and the interviews are still preserved, each piece of evidence reinforcing the others. And though decades have passed, the lights over Kaikoura have never been conclusively explained. They remain as they were that night, bright points against a dark sky, moving with a purpose only they seem to know. The Kofu City Vineyard Landing. In the mid-1970s, the city of Kofu in Yamanashi Prefecture, Japan, was known more for its vineyards and quiet mountain scenery than for anything mysterious. It was a provincial capital nestled in a basin between the Japanese Alps, its streets filled with the rhythms of family life and the changing seasons. In February, the vineyards stood bare, their rows of skeletal vines stretching across the countryside, like black lines scratched across pale soil. Winter nights were cold and silent, broken only by the faint hum of a distant train or the rustle of wind in the trellises. On Sunday, February 23, 1975, two 7-year-old boys, Masato Kawano and Katsuhiro Yamahata, had spent the afternoon visiting a friend. As the sky grew dark, they left his house and began the familiar walk home through Kamimachi, a neighborhood at the edge of Kofu where the vineyards began. It was just after 6Q in the evening. The air was crisp, the mountains stood in shadow, and the only light came from scattered windows and a faint moon. Their path led directly between the dormant vines, a shortcut they had taken countless times before. That night, however, the ordinary path became the site of one of Japan's strangest encounters. As the boys walked, they noticed something unusual above the horizon. 2 orange lights glowed against the darkening sky. At first, they assumed it must be helicopters, perhaps flying from an airfield, or lanterns drifting in the cold air. Yet the lights behaved oddly. They hung too still, too steady. There was no flickering, no swinging, no engine thrum echoing through the valley. The glow was even, pulsing faintly as though it had its own heartbeat. The boys slowed their steps, staring upward. Then the 2 lights began to move together, closing the distance between them until they merged into a single, brighter glow. To their astonishment, it did not remain in the sky. It began to descend, lowering steadily directly toward the vineyards in front of them. They whispered nervously, torn between the instinct to run home and the pull of curiosity. Instead of fleeing, they pressed forward, their small feet crunching on the dirt path. As they neared the clearing, the glow resolved into a distinct shape. There, resting among the vines, was a domed craft. The object was roughly 5 meters across, shaped like an upside-down bowl. It glowed with a warm orange light, as if lit from within, the glow spilling out through seams and edges in its smooth surface. The metal gleamed faintly, reflecting both its own glow and the moon above. Around it, the trellis wires of the vineyard glimmered orange, casting twisted shadows across the ground. The boys froze. The craft emitted no roar, no hiss of engines. Instead, the air was filled with a low, humming vibration, so deep it seemed to come from the earth itself. Masato and Katsuhiro felt it in their chests, as if their hearts were matching its rhythm. They stared in awe and fear. Then the object shifted. A line appeared in its side, widening into a hatch. Slowly, mechanically, it slid open. What emerged from the opening was not light or smoke, but a figure. It stepped down heavily from the craft, its movement deliberate. The being was small, about 120 centimeters tall, not much taller than the children themselves. Its body was humanoid with arms and legs, but its proportions were strange. The head was too large for its body. The skin of its face appeared wrinkled and metallic, as if weathered bronze had been shaped into flesh. Its ears were sharply pointed, jutting out against the glow. Most horrifying were its hands. Where fingers should have been, the children saw claws, curved, metallic, glistening in the orange light. Behind it, still inside the craft, a second figure stood partially visible in the hatch. It watched, but did not step out. The first being advanced alone, walking slowly across the soil with a heavy gait, as if each step carried weight far beyond its size. Masato and Katsuhiro clutched at each other's sleeves. Their breaths came shallow, quick. The being moved closer, its large, wrinkled head tilted slightly as it studied them. Then, with one clawed hand, it reached out. Before either child could retreat, the being placed its hand firmly on Masato's shoulder. The effect was immediate. Masato felt his body lock. His arms would not lift. His legs would not move. He was paralyzed, frozen in place, though his mind screamed to run. His throat tightened, his breath caught, and a wave of helpless terror washed over him. Katsuhiro shouted in panic, calling his friend's name. The sound broke the stillness like shattering glass. At that instant, Masato's paralysis lifted. He stumbled back, gasping, his body his own again. Without another thought, the boys turned and bolted, running full speed through the vineyard rows. Their feet kicked up soil, their lungs burned, their hearts pounded so violently they thought they might collapse. Behind them, the orange glow of the craft pulsed steadily, lighting the vines in strange, shifting shadows. By the time they reached the edge of the neighborhood, tears blurred their eyes. Their voices tripped over one another as they shouted for help. They had seen something no child should see. A craft that landed, a being that stepped out, and a clawed hand that reached for human flesh. And they were not the only ones to notice the light. From nearby homes, neighbors had also seen a strange glow over the vineyard. One woman later described it as though the field was burning but without flames. Another man claimed the orange light illuminated the trellises, too steady and strong to be mistaken for fire. They stood on their balconies, staring in unease, unsure whether to believe their own eyes. What they saw confirmed the boys' terror. Something had landed in the vineyard that night. When Masato and Katsuhiro burst into their homes, they were half crying, half shouting, their words tumbling over each other so quickly their parents could hardly understand. Their mothers tried to calm them, asking if they had been chased by dogs or attacked by bullies, but the boys shook their heads violently. What came out instead was a story so strange that at first it seemed like a child's fantasy. A glowing ship, a hatch opening, beings with wrinkled metallic faces and claws. The boys could barely catch their breath, but their stories matched. Each described the same glowing dome in the vineyard, the same grotesque being with a clawed hand, the same moment when Masato was frozen by its touch. When questioned separately, their descriptions did not waver. Their fathers, skeptical but concerned, urged them to draw what they had seen. The children sat with pencils and paper. Their hands shook, but the drawings that emerged were clear. A domed craft glowing in orange light, a figure with pointed ears and a wrinkled face, and hands ending in curved claws. What unsettled the parents was how consistent the two sketches were. Even drawn apart, the details matched almost perfectly. Neighbors soon joined in, having noticed the boys' panicked return. Several admitted that they too had seen a glow over the vineyard. One woman described it as a ball of fire that seemed to float low among the vines. Another man swore he saw the orange light reflect off the metal trellises as if the vineyard itself were glowing. These independent accounts gave weight to the children's words. Masato's father decided to see for himself. He stepped outside with a flashlight heading toward the vineyard. The glow had already dimmed, but he glimpsed it one last time. A faint orange sphere rising slowly above the rows, drifting higher until it disappeared into the night sky. He returned pale, saying only that something had indeed been there. By now, the story had reached a point where silence was impossible. The parents contacted the local police. Officers arrived and led the way into the vineyard. Their flashlights swept the ground, cutting through the dark. At the spot the boys had described, they found odd impressions in the soil. The marks were shallow but symmetrical, as though heavy objects had pressed briefly into the earth. Some grass nearby appeared singed, its edges browned and brittle. The officers took note, though they said little. The investigation quickly drew the attention of the local press. On February 25, 1975, the regional newspaper Yamanashi Nippo ran an article on what it called a mystery landing. The piece recounted the testimony of Masato and Katsuhiro, the corroborating neighbors, and the curious soil marks. Most strikingly, it included reproductions of the boys' sketches, crude childlike drawings of a domed craft, and figures with clawed hands and pointed ears. The publication caused a stir in the community. Some readers dismissed it as children's fantasy magnified by rumor, but others took it seriously. The consistency of the accounts, the corroborating witnesses, and the strange soil evidence made it difficult to dismiss entirely. At school, classmates whispered about Masato and Katsuhiro. Some teased them, calling them dreamers. Others avoided them, unsettled by the thought that their friends might have touched something from beyond the world they knew. The boys themselves withdrew, frightened not only by what they had seen, but also by the unwanted attention that followed. Their parents, meanwhile, struggled with unease. They could not ignore their children's terror, nor the strange details they could not have invented. The metallic wrinkles of the being's face, the claws instead of fingers, the low vibration felt in the chest. These were not the details of fairy tales or cartoons. They were too precise, too grotesque, too out of place in the mind of a child. In the neighborhood, the event became the subject of endless speculation. Some families warned their children not to play near the vineyards after dark. Others insisted it must have been a prank, though none could explain how such a trick could produce soil impressions or glowing orange light seen by multiple witnesses. The police closed their brief inquiry with no conclusion. The report noted only that soil disturbances had been observed and that witness accounts were inconsistent with known aerial phenomena. No samples were ever released and no further official investigation was pursued. Yet the image of the children's sketches lingered in the public imagination. People could not forget the crude but chilling drawings of beings with claws, wrinkled faces, and pointed ears. Details so different from the smooth, friendly images of aliens portrayed in films. These sketches carried the raw honesty of frightened children struggling to capture what they had seen. For the boys themselves, the incident marked a turning point. Masato confided later that he dreamed of the wrinkled face for weeks afterward, waking in a sweat with the sensation of the claw still on his shoulder. Katsuhiro became more withdrawn, reluctant to walk alone at night. Both avoided the vineyards for months, their once familiar path now haunted by the memory of that glowing dome and the silent, grotesque beings it carried. The Yamanashi newspaper report was clipped and saved by researchers across Japan. In the years that followed, the Kofu incident would be cataloged in UFO journals and discussed at conferences, but in the days immediately after, it was simply a community mystery, a story whispered between neighbors, a cautionary tale for children, a subject of nervous talk among parents who did not want to believe, but could not entirely dismiss, what the boys had seen. It was in every sense a haunting, not of ghosts or folklore spirits, but of something far stranger, a presence that descended briefly into an ordinary vineyard, left impressions in the soil, touched the shoulder of a child, and then slipped silently back into the sky. The story of the vineyard encounter did not end with the police reports or the newspaper article. For Masato and Katsuhiro, it became a memory they carried into adulthood, a moment of childhood that never lost its edge of fear. Unlike playground accidents or schoolyard mischief, this was an experience that etched itself into their identities. When asked about it years later, they repeated the same details without variation: the glowing dome, the clawed hands, the wrinkled metallic face, and the paralysis that struck Masato when touched. As teenagers, they were cautious in discussing the event. By then, they knew how easily their classmates could turn serious accounts into mockery, yet they never retracted their story. Whenever pressed, they insisted it had truly happened, that the grotesque beings were not dreams, not folklore, not imagination. The terror of running through the vineyard rows, breathless and crying, was too sharp, too vivid to be dismissed as invention. For researchers, this consistency was striking. Children often exaggerate or forget details over time. Memories shift, blur, or conform to expectations. But the accounts of Masato and Katsuhiro remained stable, their drawings unchanged, their words echoing the same sequence of events. It was as though the memory had frozen in place, untouched by the years. In the 1980s, Japanese UFO researchers revisited the case. They interviewed surviving neighbors, tracked down copies of the newspaper article, and examined the boys' sketches. What intrigued them most was the uniqueness of the beings described. Unlike the archetypal greys reported in American encounters with smooth skin, large black eyes, and delicate fingers, the Kofu beings were grotesque, wrinkled, clawed, almost monstrous. Their features did not match the popular imagery of aliens found in cinema or books. This raised a question: why would children invent such disturbing details? If they had been influenced by media, they might have described saucer-shaped craft and humanoids closer to science fiction stereotypes. Instead, their drawings suggested something unfamiliar, alien in the truest sense. One Japanese investigator remarked, "If this was fantasy, it was a fantasy no child should ever have chosen." The physical details also unsettled researchers. The paralysis experienced by Masato echoed reports from other encounters around the world, where witnesses claimed beams of light or touches from entities rendered them immobile. Yet, the boy's description of the sensation was childlike and raw. He could not move. He could not breathe. He felt trapped inside his own body until his friend's scream released him. Some skeptics turned to cultural explanations. Japan is a land rich in folklore where tales of supernatural beings stretch back centuries. Tengu, creatures with strange faces and otherworldly powers, were part of mountain legend. Oni, demons with claws and grotesque features, haunted traditional stories. Could the boys have unconsciously drawn on these images when struggling to describe what they saw? Perhaps, yet Masato and Katsuhiro insisted what they saw was not myth. It had a machine, a glowing craft with a hatch. It emerged from metal, not mist. They had seen it land in a vineyard, not in the pages of a storybook. For them, there was no confusion between folklore and the reality of that night. The case gained a modest place in Japan's UFO history. It was often cited as one of the country's few encounters involving not only a landed craft, but also visible beings. Researchers cataloged it alongside other sightings of the 1970s. In Fukushima, 1973, glowing discs hovered above farmland. In Shimane Prefecture, 1977, fishermen described luminous objects skimming the waves at sea. In Hokkaido, 1978, air defense radar tracked fast-moving intruders that defied conventional explanation. But none of these involved beings that stepped out, touched a witness, and left marks in memory as deep as scars. The Kofu case remained unique. For the families in Kamimachi, it became a story told in whispers. Children were warned not to stray into the vineyards after dark. The land itself seemed changed. Even years later, those who lived nearby recalled the orange glow, the panic of the boys, the strange silence that followed. What was missing was any official response. No national agency followed up. No samples were released. No broader investigation was undertaken. The government maintained silence as though the incident had never occurred. The only surviving evidence was the newspaper clipping, the boys' sketches, and the memories of those who stood on balconies that February night and saw the glow for themselves. For Masato and Katsuhiro, the impact was lifelong. They grew older, pursued ordinary lives, but the encounter remained. Interviews conducted decades later revealed they could still describe the wrinkled skin, the clawed hands, the way the being's face looked in the orange light. Masato admitted that even as an adult, he sometimes felt the ghost of the claw on his shoulder, a phantom sensation that returned when he thought too long about that night. Japanese researchers often reflected on the strangeness of the case. In a country where UFO reports were relatively rare compared to the United States or Europe, why would one of the few detailed encounters feature beings so grotesque, so unlike any others? Was this a clue to authenticity, or an indication that whatever had happened in Kofu was of an entirely different nature than the flying saucer culture of the West? The answer has never been found. Today, the vineyard itself has changed. Houses have been built, roads paved. Yet, for those who remember, the land remains marked by what occurred. The memory is not carried in monuments or plaques, but in hushed recollections, in the clipped and yellowed pages of a 1975 newspaper, and in the sketches of two frightened boys who tried to draw what should not exist. The enduring chill of the Kofu City Vineyard landing lies in its simplicity. Two children walking home at dusk, a glow in the sky that descended into the fields, a domed craft that opened, a claw that reached out and touched the shoulder of a boy. No messages, no explanations, no spectacular displays of power, only a grotesque presence and a fleeting contact. The incident is unsettling, not because it offers answers, but because it refuses them. The beings made no effort to communicate. They did not chase, did not speak, did not linger. They appeared, observed, touched, and departed, leaving behind fear, confusion, and a sense of intrusion so profound that it still unsettles those who study it. For Masato and Katsuhiro, it was the night childhood innocence ended in a vineyard. For everyone else, it is a reminder that the unknown does not always arrive in deserts or military bases. Sometimes it comes quietly to a neighborhood path where children walk home at dusk. And sometimes all it leaves behind is a sketch, a newspaper clipping, and the memory of a clawed hand in the dark. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I love hearing from you. Check out more videos on the screen, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.